Chapter 1635. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile and say, "Actually, if you want to solve your current predicament, it might be a good idea to start from the cultivation system of this world." After several years of getting along, the relationship between Luo Fan and the Broken Emperor had eased a lot. Now, Luo Fan was no longer stingy to give him some advice. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the Broken Emperor's eyes suddenly lit up, revealing an indescribable surprise. He had no idea why Luo Fan cared so much about the cultivation system and cultivation methods of this world. However, from Luo Fan's words, he could tell that the cultivation system and cultivation methods of this world seemed to contain more profound mysteries than he had imagined. They might even be useful for his current predicament. For the Broken Emperor, who had been carefully looking for a solution for several years, but ultimately failed to find any solution, it was like suddenly lighting a match in a pitch-black night. Although it was only a faint light, it had already dispelled the darkness and given him endless hope. Cultivation method. Predicament. These two words kept reverberating in his heart, causing countless inspirations to appear in his mind. After all, the Broken Emperor was a supreme sovereign. His understanding of cultivation and perception of the Great Tao were many times stronger than that of any other living beings who were not at the sovereign level. Previously, he couldn't think of it because of the limitation of his thinking. Now, after being reminded by Luo Fan, this limitation of his thinking was instantly broken. For a moment, all kinds of mysteries that he should have been able to see gradually emerged in his heart, allowing him to gradually find a trace that could solve his current predicament. "Thank you, my friend, for your advice." Noticing the change in his heart, the Broken Emperor understood that Luo Fan had given him real advice. He immediately bowed and said. Seeing him like this, Luo Fan knew that the Broken Emperor had already comprehended something. He smiled faintly and said, "I just said something casually. Everything is my friend's own ability." When the Broken Emperor heard this, his expression became somewhat complicated. He naturally knew that Luo Fan was just being polite, but his gratitude towards Luo Fan did not diminish in the slightest. And this strong sense of gratitude, at this moment, it was in conflict with his ultimate goal. In other words, there was a conflict with him completely refining the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Under such circumstances, how could his expression not be complicated? In the end, he sighed. He said, "No matter what, I have to thank you, fellow Taoist. In order to repay your kindness, no matter how you deal with this connate, inextinguishable spirit light, I won't interfere." Luo Fan listened. He smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. Seeing this, the Broken Emperor did not say anything more. He bowed to Luo Fan again, then turned around and took a step forward. His figure had already disappeared in front of Luo Fan. He found a random place in this world, and began to carefully study the research that he needed to carry out. The moment the Broken Emperor left, Luo Fan frowned. Because at this moment, the surrounding space-time seemed to be slightly distorted. "Trying to mystify us," he said calmly. After saying this, he gently squeezed, and the surrounding space-time exploded with a bang. Immediately after, a few figures appeared in front of him. Luo Fan was quite familiar with these figures. They were the false sages of this world. These false sages were originally planning to hide at the side and observe the situation before deciding what to do. Suddenly, Luo Fan squeezed them out of their hiding state and directly revealed them. For a moment, their expressions were a little strange. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Fortunately, the reaction speed of these false sages was quite fast. After a moment of strange expressions, they quickly bowed to Luo Fan. Although they addressed him as fellow Taoist, their attitude was very humble originally, because they did not see Luo Fan make a move. Luo Fan was just an ordinary false sage to them. The reason they came here just now was to ask him who the Broken Emperor was and what his purpose was. But now, after Luo Fan made a move, They realized that this person in front of them was not just an ordinary false sage. He was even more powerful than the broken emperor. Now that they had bumped into him, it was like they had just left the wolf's den and entered the tiger's mouth. When Luo Fan saw them, he said indifferently, "There's no need to be so polite. You guys cultivate your own, and I'll cultivate mine. Won't it be fine if we don't interfere with each other's business? Why do you have to appear in front of me?" Hearing this, the few pseudo-sages secretly groaned. "I'm really sorry. We're just carrying out the duty of heaven and earth, but we just want to have a backup plan against the living beings that threaten this world," one of the women said. This woman was not the strongest among the false sages present, but she was the most amiable. Therefore, when she spoke, it made people feel more comfortable than when the other young and old men spoke. When Luo Fan heard this, he said indifferently, "You don't have to pay attention to him. Be it him or me, we have no interest in destroying this world. Go, don't disturb us in front of me." Hearing this, regardless of whether these false sages believed him or not, they all pretended to believe him. They immediately bowed to Luo Fan again, and then carefully retreated, returning to the world that they had created. Seeing them leave, Luo Fan smiled faintly and did not say anything else. He began to eat and drink the bejeweled nectar in this restaurant. During the entire process just now, whether it was the departure of the broken emperor or the appearance and departure of those false sages, it did not attract the attention of anyone in this restaurant. Even though this was clearly discovered in front of everyone in this restaurant, it was still the same. To the people in this restaurant, there had always been only Luo Fan here. Moreover, he had been calmly enjoying the various special dishes of this restaurant. This was a method to completely isolate all senses and even block memories. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." At this moment, a voice suddenly entered Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan took a look and saw that it was a woman. The woman's current position was in another direction of the restaurant. Beside her, there were 3 other women sitting at the same table as her. These people were all quite strong, at least at the false sage level. Just this kind of strength alone could already be considered a top-notch powerhouse in this world. "Oh? So it's a fellow Taoist from the 100 Flowers sect. Greetings, Luo Fan." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said. Luo Fan's understanding of this world was already extremely deep. These women in front of him. With just a glance, he already knew their identities. Hearing Luo Fan reveal their identities, the expressions of these women changed slightly. They looked at each other and saw hesitation in each other's eyes. In the end, it was the woman who spoke who nodded. She turned her head and said to Luo Fan, "I didn't expect fellow Taoist Luo Fan's eyesight to be so strong. I'm Peony." As they spoke, the other 3 also introduced themselves. They were all named after flowers. They were Peony, Azalea, Rose, so it's fellow Taoist. Luo Fan smiled. With his cultivation realm, these women were really like ants to him. He shouldn't have taken a liking to them. He shouldn't have paid any attention to them. However, Luo Fan's heart moved slightly. He could faintly sense an indescribable feeling from them. This feeling made him vaguely know that if he could come into contact with them with this body of his, he might be able to break through and become a false sage of more worlds in the future, and this was extremely beneficial for him to understand the profoundness of this cultivation system. It was also extremely beneficial for him to understand the profoundness of this innate indestructible spiritual light. It was precisely because of this that he took the opportunity to communicate with them. After exchanging some pleasantries, Luo Fan was invited to the table where the women from the 100 Flowers sect were sitting. After that, these women talked about why they wanted to communicate with Luo Fan this time. It turned out that they had discovered an entrance that might be the ancient demon world. There might be a crisis that could completely destroy this world, and they wanted to go and investigate. However, they were afraid that it would be dangerous, so they wanted to let Luo Fan go to the 100 Flowers sect to deliver the news. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned and said, "What news?" With your strength, it shouldn't be a problem for you to send some news, right? Why do you need someone to personally deliver it? The peony sighed and said, You might not know, but the spacetime here is already within the scope of the ancient demon world's rules. It's impossible for any news related to the demon world to spread. Therefore, I can only ask you to make a trip. The rules of the ancient demon world. Luo Fan frowned slightly. He had a thought and carefully sensed it. Indeed, he could sense traces of rules that did not belong to this world in the rules of this underground space. This kind of rule was extremely obscure and mysterious. It completely enveloped the entire underground space, and it seemed to have the feeling of controlling everything. Of course, this kind of control was only at the level below a false sage. For existences above a false sage, it really did not affect them at all. Not to mention for existences like Luo Fan, who was even more powerful than ordinary emperors. It was also because of the limitations of this kind of control that Luo Fan did not notice the existence of this kind of control, which was why he asked such a question just now. After spending so much time in this world, he already had an extremely deep understanding of the various concepts and legends of this world. In the legends of this world, an extremely long time ago, this world was not like this. At that time, in the sky, it was not the 18 heavens, but an ancient heaven world. There were countless immortals, countless gods, and even a supreme being known as the Devas. There was no place that wasn't beautiful, no place that wasn't wonderful. Even ordinary mortals who entered would be able to enjoy eternal happiness and joy. And under the ground, there was another ancient demon world. In this ancient demon world, there were countless demons, countless evil spirits, and even the legendary endless Een gods and so on. The environment was so bad that it could even completely offset the beauty of the ancient heaven world. And back then, in the ancient heaven world, as the guardian of the human world, it protected everything in the human world. And the ancient demon world was the enemy of the human world. It wanted to seize and destroy everything in the human world. At that time, the battles between the heaven, earth, and human worlds were everywhere, and the world was destroyed thousands of times. It was not until the 18 sages appeared that the connection between the celestials, humans, and demons was severed. They even set up the 18 heavens. They suppressed the heaven and demon worlds. In the end, this world became what it was today, allowing this world to obtain hundreds of millions of years of peace from the ancient times to the present, and in the legends, once the ancient demon world or the ancient heaven world descended, this world would undergo a huge change. If the ancient demon world descended, the world would be destroyed. If the ancient heaven world descended, the world would be sublimated and eventually advanced to an unbelievable level. Regarding such a legend, after Luo Fan heard it, he naturally deduced it and compared it with the situation of this world. Then, he knew what was going on. The ancient heaven realm and the ancient demon realm were, in fact, just another world. In other words, an extremely long time ago, this world was actually closely connected to the other two worlds that had evolved from the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. And the great Tao and rules of those two worlds were different from this world. One was like the heaven world in the dream, and the other was like the demon world in the nightmare. It was precisely because of this that they were called the heaven world and the demon world. Such a heaven and demon world had been connected to this world for an unknown period of time. In the end, because of the birth of a false sage, the strength of this world was strengthened. In the end, a repulsive force was produced between this world and the other two worlds, and in the end, the connection between the three was cut off. According to the origin of the ancient demon world, the situation that appeared in the underground space at this moment was actually very obvious. It must be the world that was regarded as the ancient demon world. For some reason, it was gradually approaching this world at this time. It was starting to connect with this world again. Saints are omniscient. Perhaps they already know, Luo Fan said with a smile. Although saints are omniscient, We are born from this world, so we can't not do our part." The peony sighed helplessly. As she spoke, her face was full of solemnity, and there was an unshakable determination in her eyes. "I'm not familiar with the 100-Flower sect. I want to send a letter, but I can't win their trust. Why don't we do this? Fellow Taoists, please send a letter, and I'll go and explore the truth of the ancient demon world on your behalf. How about that?" Luo Fan said with a smile. Hearing this, the few women from the 100-Flower sect were slightly taken aback. Obviously, they hadn't thought of such a suggestion before. The few of them looked at each other and faintly communicated with each other using their spiritual will. After a while, they finally calmed down. In the end, the one called Du Wan said, "What fellow Taoist said makes sense. The 100-Flower sect is full of women, and they have some prejudice against men like you. If fellow Taoist goes, I'm afraid you'll be treated as a lecher. It's better for me to go back to the sect." Luo Fan smiled and said, "That's how it should be." The current situation was quite urgent, but Du Wan did not stay for long. She immediately bid farewell to everyone and disappeared without a trace in a flash. "I heard that the 100-Flower sect is the inheritance of a saint. I wonder if that's true?" "Of course it's true. Our 100-Flower sect inherited the Myriad Flower Saint. Although it's not a direct disciple, it's not something that ordinary sects can compare to." Speaking of the sect, the few women all looked proud. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled a little strangely. Among the few fake saints that came here previously was the Myriad Flower Saint. However, it was not appropriate for him to say too much at this time, so he said directly, "So it's really a disciple of a saint. In that case, there's a high chance that this matter will succeed. Let's not waste time and start as soon as possible." Hearing this, Peony shook her head and said, "This time, we've actually already found the location where the ancient demon realm is about to merge. It's just that that location is currently closed, and it's not the time for it to truly open yet. It's useless for us to go there now, but we still have to wait for 6 hours." Luo Fan smiled and said, "I'm quite confident in my divination ability. Although that place hasn't opened yet, it's not necessarily impossible to deal with it after we go there." Peony and the others heard this. Their eyes could not help but light up slightly. Originally, they only invited Luo Fan because they could not see through Luo Fan, and the matter of the ancient demon realm descending again this time concerned the survival of the entire world. However, they did not think that Luo Fan would be of much help. They did not expect that a cultivator they randomly invited would actually be a cultivator that would be of great help to their goal this time. This naturally made them feel overjoyed. "That's great. Looks like encountering fellow Taoist is really our fortune," Peony said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan just smiled. The few of them stood up. He left the restaurant. This underground space was extremely vast. But it was not just the area of the city. In fact, whether it was horizontally or vertically apart from the city. But there was still a huge space. Horizontally speaking, it was outside the city. It was on the same plane as the city. Vertically, it was obviously the opposite of horizontally. The city went down. He looked up. Peony and the others had discovered the region where the primordial devil world was about to descend. However, it was an extremely deep place below the vertical. After Luo Fan and the others left the restaurant, they didn't go in any other direction. Instead, they continued to head downwards in the restaurant at a rapid pace. Moreover, in this world, the sky was round and the earth was thick and solid. Luo Fan felt as if he had penetrated through hundreds of millions of miles, passing through tens of thousands of layers of underground space before arriving at their destination. Although the underground city from before was tens of thousands of layers of underground space away from here, but the first layer of that underground city was the closest location with a city. Apart from that place, although there were countless living beings in the tens of thousands of layers of underground space below, no one had built a city there. The reason for this was very simple. The tens of thousands of layers of underground space below were filled with all kinds of tyrannical and powerful creatures. Even demi-saints couldn't withstand them. It was indeed possible to build a city in such an underground space, but the price needed to be paid was far, far too great. The gains simply didn't make up for the losses. It was precisely because of this that no one had built a city there. Luo Fan and Peony passed through the tens of thousands of layers of space and arrived above the sea of magma at the lowest level. They each hovered in the air. "It's here." Peony looked down at the sea of magma below. Her expression was somewhat fearful. Luo Fan looked down and instantly saw a boundless sea of fire. Within that sea of fire, countless waves of magma were surging and tumbling. The flames in this sea of fire weren't ordinary flames. Instead, they were flames that were extremely fatal to pseudo-saints. The magma didn't look like it was formed from melting rock. Instead, it looked like the flames had compressed and condensed into liquid. When he saw this sea of magma, Luo Fan instantly understood its essence. In fact, the sea of magma in front of him wasn't actually the flames of this world, but the flames of another world. Moreover, the nature of that other world was almost the complete opposite of this world. Because the nature of that world was completely opposite, the flames that seeped in were absolutely destructive to that world. Anything that belonged to that world would be easily ignited when thrown into the flames. Everything that belonged to that world would eventually be completely eliminated. Even if it was a pseudo-sage existence that had fallen into the flames, it would still be the same. It was precisely because this sea of magma had this characteristic that the flames were so destructive to pseudo-saints. As for why the flames could exist stably here, and not incessantly burn the surrounding spacetime and the surrounding nomological laws to completely destroy it, the reason was very simple. This was because this underground space had already been completely scorched by the sea of magma. At this very moment, this place seemed normal, but it had actually been completely transformed into the environment of another world. Whether it was nomological laws, time, space, energy, or matter, everything was the same. It really is the ancient demon world. According to ancient legends, if the demon world were to descend again, the flames of the demon world would burn the world and destroy everything. Looks like this is the flames of the demon world. Luo Fan sighed. What he said was indeed the legend of this world. There wasn't the slightest bit of falsehood in this. Peony and the others nodded when they heard Luo Fan's words. Chapter 1636. Given the characteristics of the demonic world fire, the fact that this underground space could still be preserved meant that its characteristics had already been completely changed by the demonic world fire. At this very moment, it actually no longer belonged to this world. Instead, it could be considered to belong to the ancient demonic world. It was precisely because of this that Peony and the others dared to say that the ancient demonic world was about to descend and reappear in this world. After all, according to the quantity of the demonic world fire, it would eventually ignite the entire underground space of tens of thousands of layers and completely assimilate it. That was truly nothing more than normal, so much so that the speed at which it happened was extremely fast. Peony watched Luo Fan's careful observation. She seemed to have a pensive look in her eyes as she asked, "I wonder if you've noticed any clues?" Luo Fan listened and smiled faintly. This is clearly an expert on the other side working hard to open up a spacetime channel. These demonic world fires are some preparations that the other side has sent over. Peony's complexion changed slightly when she heard this. She had originally only asked casually. She didn't really want to hear a definite answer from Luo Fan. After all, although Luo Fan looked very strong, he was only very strong. Compared to those supreme saints, he was still lacking by an unknown amount. How could it be possible for him to be truly omniscient? However, she hadn't expected that Luo Fan would actually directly give a definite answer. This made her instantly feel that the cultivator she had invited seemed to be even more powerful than she had imagined. After her complexion changed slightly, she was dumbstruck. She had already reacted to what Luo Fan was talking about. There was an expert behind them. In other words, they were working hard to open up a channel in the ancient demonic world. They wanted to reconnect the two worlds. What did this represent? It represented them. They were about to face a powerful existence that schemed to completely destroy this world. Compared to what they had previously thought was a natural change, the situation was more than 10 times worse. Then what should we do? The two women at the side cried out in alarm at this moment. Luo Fan smiled and said, "The best way is, of course, to kill the person on the other side." How is this possible? The ancient demon world was hidden very deeply, and the barrier between it and this world was so thick that only a saint could break it. How could existences like us break through the barriers of this world? Go to that world and kill him? Peony said anxiously in that instant. Exactly. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if we can break through this barrier and kill him, wouldn't we be complying with his wishes and not needing him to break through? The two worlds will be able to communicate with each other. Another person said anxiously at this time. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Since there's no other way, there's only one other way." What method? Peony asked anxiously. Completely extinguish these demon world flames, or change them to a type of flame that belongs to this world, forming a flame barrier here, so as to prevent too many experts from crossing this passage to come here. Doesn't that mean we have to watch as the passageway opens up? Peony said incredulously. She originally thought that Luo Fan would propose something like reinforcing spacetime, but she didn't expect that Luo Fan didn't say it directly. However, the meaning behind his words was clearly to allow the other side to open up the spacetime passageway and allow the ancient demon realm to descend upon this world once again. There's nothing I can do about it. We can't kill the experts on the other side. Then the other side would definitely not stop. No matter how much we fortify and defend, we will eventually be breached. In comparison, it's better to directly open the passageway so that we can concentrate our strength to fight against it, Luo Fan said. Upon hearing this, Peony and the others were very unwilling. That was only natural. As female cultivators, they were much more emotional than Luo Fan. The only thought in his mind was to repel the enemy as much as possible, to prevent the enemy from invading this world as much as possible, and to avoid all conflicts as much as possible. Under such circumstances, how could they adapt to Luo Fan's initiative to fight? However, although they couldn't adapt, they still couldn't find another solution in the end. After hemming and hawing for a while, they finally agreed to Luo Fan's proposal. As for them agreeing to his proposal, Luo Fan wasn't the least bit surprised. After all, his suggestion was the best way to deal with the current situation. Since they'd already agreed on a solution, the next step was naturally to take action. Although Peony and the others were just ants among ants compared to Luo Fan, they were still existences equivalent to pseudo-saint rank existences no matter how one looked at it. The strength of such existences was enough to shake the heavens and shake the earth. Before, they hadn't thought of a solution, so they were naturally at a loss. But now that they'd confirmed the route and the target, countless inspirations began to emerge in their hearts. Regarding this boundless sea of underground fire and magma below, there were who knew how many solutions. "I'll change this space back first," Peony said first. Having said this, she raised her hand and lightly pointed. In an instant, the entire underground space was filled with a faint aroma. The aroma was extremely weak at first, but as time passed, it grew stronger and more obvious. Then, amidst the light emitted by the sea of underground fire and magma, light and shadows that couldn't possibly appear in this place gradually emerged. In the void, peony flowers began to bloom out of thin air. These flowers grew in clusters and covered the entire underground space, almost filling the entire space. These flowers weren't ordinary flowers, of course. After they appeared, they directly fused with the space-time of this location, and also fused with the rules and laws of this place. During this fusion, whether it was the space-time, the rules and laws, or even the matter and energy. They were all unknowingly transformed by the flowers. Wisps of black impurities continuously seeped out of these various existences, gradually dripping down and finally merging into the sea of underground fire and magma below. They completely disappeared without a trace. Fellow Taoist's magic is truly marvelous. Luo Fan smiled slightly when he saw this. He'd seen quite a few magic arts that used flowers to perform when his cultivation was still low. But as his cultivation continued to rise and grow, this kind of scene had become increasingly rare. Now that he saw this kind of pseudo-saint level technique again, he couldn't believe it. In his heart, however, he really found it a little novel. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Peony forced a smile. At this moment, he was clearly quite strained. Moreover, he wasn't in a very good mood. It was certain that he was strained. It must be known that the vast and boundless sea of underground fire and magma was constantly burning this space-time, constantly changing the changes he'd made before. Such a change! How could she possibly be relaxed? As for being in a bad mood, that was even more natural. What he was doing now was clearly against her wishes. It would be strange if he was in a good mood. Knowing how she was feeling, Luo Fan didn't waste any more words and only smiled faintly. Following Peony's actions, the remaining two women also called out to each other and began to move. They also raised their hands and pointed at the void. Two flowers that corresponded to their names also bloomed in the void. Compared to Peony, these flowers only changed space-time, matter, and energy. In terms of changing the laws of nature, the effect was more on the underground fire and magma below. Of course, these flowers didn't directly change the sea of magma. Instead, they vaguely created a completely sealed space-time and slowly sucked the sea of magma into it. They still didn't have the power to directly change the nature of the sea of magma. However, if they put away the sea of magma, it wouldn't be difficult for them. The cooperation between the three of them was extremely tight. In just a few short days, they had completed the entire process. By the time they were done, the underground space had completely changed. The sea of magma below had disappeared, replaced by a strange flat surface. It seemed to be filled with flames, but couldn't be burned. It was a fiery red flat surface. On this plane, the numerous flowers that originally existed in the void had completely disappeared at this moment. However, the fragrance left behind by the flowers still remained. It hadn't disappeared because of this. Peony took the space-time that her companion handed over and turned it over to Luo Fan. She said, "Please forgive us, fellow Taoist. We're already powerless to do this. I'm afraid we'll have to rely on you to change the nature of the demonic world's flames." In fact, accomplishing this step could already be considered to have completed the first step of their requirement. But because Luo Fan's previous proposal wasn't in line with their wishes, they had no choice but to agree due to the overall situation. Therefore, they weren't stingy in giving him some trouble at this time. Changing the nature of the demonic world's flames, which were completely incompatible with this world, and turning them into the flames of this world, was a gargantuan troublesome matter that was naturally handed over to Luo Fan to solve. When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled slightly and nodded. "Then leave it to me." Saying this, he smoothly took the space-time. Luo Fan's straightforwardness, on the other hand, made Peony and the others feel a little incredulous. One had to know that they had already mentally prepared themselves for Luo Fan to refuse. In fact, they were already thinking about how Luo Fan would refuse, how they would answer, and how they would attack him. However, they didn't expect that all these preparations would be like punching cotton. It was completely useless, and they couldn't help but feel a little dissatisfied. In the end, it was Peony who reminded him dryly, "You'd better hurry up. Those flames below are going to drill their way over again. It'll be quick." Luo Fan just smiled. Changing the nature of these flames couldn't be any easier for him. Not to forget, Even if Luo Fan himself was an emperor who had surpassed the despair stage, just looking at the flesh and blood body he had condensed at this moment, he was already at the peak of the single-world false sage level. He could break through the single-world false sage level at any time and become a multi-world false sage level. With such a method, not to mention changing the nature of these flames, if he wanted to, it wouldn't be difficult to directly kill all the experts from the ancient demon realm who were working hard to open up this world passage. Peony and the other two saw that Luo Fan was so confident. Doubt flashed in their eyes. At this time, they were even more curious about the level of Luo Fan's strength. However, when it came to matters of strength, if one could see it, then so be it. If one couldn't, then one's eyesight wasn't good. Very few people would directly ask, "What realm are you at?" Therefore, at this time, although Peony and the others were curious about the level of Luo Fan's strength, they could only forcibly hold it in. Luo Fan didn't pay much attention to them. At this time, his heart skipped a beat. His perception seeped into that space-time. When that space-time was created, it was completely constructed according to the nature of the space-time after the earth fire and magma ocean had been ignited. In other words, this space-time was actually essentially the same as the space-time of the demon realm. It was precisely because of this. Only this space-time could withstand the earth fire and the magma that was liquefied from the earth fire. At this moment, this space-time was filled with the boundless earth fire and magma. The earth fire burned fiercely, causing the entire space-time to seem to become a space-time of flames. Even the magma that was liquefied from the earth fire began to gradually change due to the change in the environment and the relaxation of the pressure. It turned back into flames, causing the raging flames in this space-time to become more and more intense. It became more and more terrifying looking at these flames. Luo Fan didn't waste any more words. His heart skipped a beat and he raised his hand. In an instant, this world produced a subtle vibration. Amidst this vibration, a strange light was spat out from the great Tao of this world. It directly penetrated through layers of barriers and descended into this underground space out of nowhere. This ray of light was so mysterious, and it constantly emitted a kind of eternal indestructibility. A charm that could not be worn down by 1,000 tribulations. Astonishingly, this was a kind of innate indestructibility. Luo Fan's speed was simply too fast, and this innate indestructibility could only be seen by existences above the false saint stage. Therefore, at this moment, although Peony and the others had been staring closely at Luo Fan's movements, they only saw Luo Fan raise his hand to guide something. They didn't know what he was guiding. However, they couldn't see the existence of any light at all. They couldn't even feel the inexplicable aura and charm that the innate indestructibility emitted. To be able to directly summon the innate indestructibility from the great Tao, this was actually an ability that Luo Fan had obtained after he condensed his body of flesh and blood and became a false saint. Before this, although he could use his own changes to make the innate indestructibility naturally descend from the great Tao, it was passive. But that was only passive, and he could only fuse with it himself. It was only after he became a false saint of this world, and his ability to control this world increased greatly that he obtained this ability. After summoning this bit of innate indestructibility, Luo Fan didn't hesitate and casually sent it into the space-time. After this bit of innate indestructibility entered the space-time, it began to expand rapidly. At first, it was only an insignificant bit, but in the blink of an eye, it had already expanded to fill the world, directly filling every spot in the entire space-time. The innate nature of connate indestructibility was an almost supreme existence. It appeared so small and insignificant in this world because this world's essence was extremely high. If it entered another world, the power that was originally suppressing it would completely relax, and it would naturally begin to expand crazily. That was why such a scene appeared. This bit of innate indestructibility did not expand endlessly. When it came into contact with the boundary of this spacetime and touched the barrier between this spacetime and the outside world, the expansion of the innate indestructibility stopped. Obviously, it was once again suppressed by this world, and could no longer expand as before. However, this degree had already met Luo Fan's requirements. With a thought, he reached his hand into the spacetime. The moment his palm entered, it expanded crazily. In the blink of an eye, it was already indomitable. It looked like a child had reached his palm into a small glass bottle. After this palm reached in, he began to stir the innate indestructibility and the lava in the sea of lava as if he was stirring. As this stirring continued, the two gradually began to mix. Although he was standing in all the worlds that the innate indestructibility had evolved from. Every world had an innate indestructibility. However, this did not mean that the innate indestructibility of every world was the same. In fact, the innate indestructibility of every world was unique. There was an intrinsic difference from any other world, and this difference was the mark of every world. Under such circumstances, now that Luo Fan was mixing the innate indestructibility with the lava, it was obvious that he was fusing the mark of this world with the lava. Under normal circumstances, this kind of fusion would be directly fused with the mark of this world. Out of 100 million marks, perhaps only one would be able to completely fuse. The rest would be completely shattered and disappear under the scorching heat of the lava. However, if this bit of innate indestructibility was used to fuse, then the situation would be different. Although this innate indestructibility might only have a mark that belonged to this world. However, because this mark was fused with the innate indestructibility, it naturally contained the innate indestructibility characteristic. This innate indestructibility characteristic was enough to make it impossible for the mark to disappear no matter what kind of polishing, burning, impact, or destruction it endured. In other words, as long as this bit of innate indestructibility wasn't removed, no matter how strong the flame's ability to destroy and wear down the mark was, the mark that belonged to this world would certainly be expelled. It would definitely be able to expel the brand in the original flame, and then completely transform the flame into the fire of this world, and no longer the fire of the demon world. Luo Fan understood this kind of change in his heart. At this moment, he was constantly stirring, but he didn't spend the slightest bit of thought. But Peony and the others didn't see it that way. In their eyes, Luo Fan was just casually grabbing at something in the void. Then, he acted as if he'd tossed it into that space. Immediately after, he began to reach out like a child playing with water, constantly stirring that space. Although his body is very valiant, he doesn't seem too smart. Peony transmitted to Peony. Don't be rude. Perhaps fellow Taoist Luo Fan has his own ideas. Peony softly reprimanded. But she didn't mean what she said. Clearly, she was also a little confused by Luo Fan's current almost irrational behavior. She felt as if her brain wasn't enough to process it. Luo Fan didn't pay them any attention at all. Just like that, he kept stirring and stirring for a full 3 days. Only when Peony and the others were a little impatient and almost opened their mouths to ask did he stop. Afterwards, without waiting for Peony and the others to open their mouths, Luo Fan smiled and said, "At least I didn't disappoint you." "How is that possible?" In that instant, Peony and the others suddenly revealed expressions of disbelief in their eyes. Even Peony, who was the most daring, had only thought that Luo Fan had been preparing for the next step in these 3 days. She hadn't expected that Luo Fan had actually already completed his mission. Peony immediately grabbed at this space with a rather rude hand and looked inside with her 2 companions. In an instant, they saw a scene that was completely different from before. All they saw was that space was filled with a kind of white flame that they felt incomparably familiar with. It filled the entire space. With a single glance, one could tell that this kind of flame possessed an incomparably astonishing heat. It seemed as if it could ignite anything. However, when the three of them looked at this flame, they didn't know why, but they suddenly felt as if they wanted to throw themselves into it. It was as if being scorched by this flame would bring them endless benefits. This is the flame of this world. Peony raised her head and asked with some astonishment. It should be considered. These flames will expel all power that doesn't belong to this world. This world's matter, this world's rules and principles, this world's space and time. Come to think of it, apart from the flame of this world, there shouldn't be any other way to call it, Luo Fan said with a smile. Expel everything that doesn't belong to this world. Then, what will happen if we throw ourselves into it? Another woman suddenly asked. You'll probably obtain some benefits. Of course, you'll first have to be able to resist the heat inside. Luo Fan was still smiling. Chapter 1637. Just as Luo Fan was refining the world flame in this underground space to create trouble for the creatures of the ancient devil world to descend, the broken emperor was somewhere in this world. He directly opened up a world, entered it, and began to study the cultivation system of this world. After receiving guidance from Luo Fan, countless inspirations burst forth, and he had all kinds of new ideas about the cultivation system of this world. At this moment, the inspiration in his heart burst forth, and he could no longer suppress it. The world that the broken emperor had opened up was a starry world that he was most familiar with. The entire world was a boundless sea of stars that emitted boundless light and contained boundless energy. The light emitted by these stars condensed in a star palace where he was standing. These various kinds of light contained some kind of indescribable cleansing effect, constantly washing his body and cleansing his power, making him feel the kind of indescribable relaxation that he rarely felt since he entered this world group. Sitting in the void, there were countless words, runes, and patterns flashing in front of the broken emperor. As an emperor, even if he was not as good as Luo Fan, he was not too far behind. He naturally knew that the most important thing in any cultivation system was the basic method. If he wanted to grasp the essence of the cultivation system, starting from the foundation was the most convenient and direct way. What appeared in front of him now were all the basic cultivation methods in the cultivation system of this world. Although it was the cultivation system of the whole world. But just like the Jindan cultivation method, the primordial spirit cultivation method, and the formation cultivation method in the universe on Earth, the primordial spirit cultivation method and other different methods were the same. In the complete cultivation system of this world, there were also countless different cultivation methods. Although these various cultivation methods followed different or even completely opposite directions, when it came to the root, they were only a part of the cultivation system, and only contained some key points of the cultivation system. Therefore, if he wanted to grasp the true mystery of the cultivation system of this world, of course, he needed to start from the foundation of the various cultivation systems. The broken emperor's thinking was broad. It was not something that any living creature in this world, except for Luo Fan, could compare with. While he was deducing, the cultivation foundation, which was already quite a lot, began to quickly derive and grow. Not long after. Originally, it had only appeared in front of him, but now it had spread to cover the entire hall. Then, through the entire hall, it continued to expand, constantly pouncing towards the entire starry sky world. In just a few days, the entire starry sky world was filled with endless runes, words, and patterns. These runes, words, and diagrams were combined together. It was a series of cultivation techniques. Every single one of them was developed from the basic cultivation methods, and they were in line with the essence of this world's cultivation system, but they were of an even higher level. An even more complicated cultivation method. This kind of cultivation method was generally similar to the naturally developed cultivation method in this world. However, in terms of details, there were slight differences between all of them. This subtle difference caused the cultivation method to appear in the starry sky world. Compared to the cultivation techniques developed in that world, it was countless times more powerful. It could be said that existences who could cultivate to the innate grand heavenly realm in the outside world, if they cultivated the cultivation method deduced by the broken emperor in this starry sky world, they would at least be able to break through the innate grand heavenly realm and become a quasi-saint. As for existences who could become a false saint, if they cultivated the cultivation method here, they might even be qualified to peek into the false saint status. This was the advantage of the cultivation method deduced by the broken emperor. The reason for this was very simple. Because the height that the broken emperor stood at was countless times higher than any expert that had appeared in this world since ancient times, even the strongest false saint. He looked down at the cultivation system of this world from such a height, developed the cultivation system of this world with such a high level of wisdom, and deduced the cultivation method of this cultivation system. Of course, he was more powerful than anyone else in this world who deduced the cultivation system of this world. The cultivation method deduced was, of course, more perfect than the cultivation method of the outside world. Through this deduction, the broken emperor's understanding of the cultivation system of this world became deeper and deeper. Finally, at a certain moment, a light flashed in his heart, and he suddenly understood the key to the cultivation method of this world. I actually only understood it now. When he understood this key, the broken emperor revealed a bitter smile. This key was hidden so deeply that he had exhausted all his wisdom when deducing it. But after discovering it, it became so simple that he should have been able to see through it at first glance. I'm still much weaker than that fellow Taoist. The broken emperor sighed in his heart. Back then, Luo Fan could easily see through all of this, and he had even decided to cultivate the cultivation system of this world before he came to this world group. However, he had been delayed for such a long time, and even almost reached the end of a detour. Just now, after being reminded by the other party, he discovered this point. To him, this was an extremely frustrating feeling, and what he comprehended, the key to the cultivation system of this world, was to touch the mystery of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. If one cultivated the cultivation method of this world according to the cultivation system of this world, as long as the steps were perfect enough, one would naturally be able to continuously get closer to the essence of this world and understand the essence of this world as one's cultivation deepened. And in this way, cultivators would be able to continuously get closer to the essence of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light and continuously understand the essence of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. In the end, when this kind of understanding reached an extremely profound level, the innate inextinguishable spiritual light would naturally inject its countless mysteries into the cultivator's heart through this kind of essence connection, allowing the cultivator to finally understand everything within it, of course. However, during this process there was also a kind of danger, which was that one might end up like the broken emperor. Because the essence of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light was refined by the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. But, after all, it was a complete cultivation process, and all the changes within it were controllable. As long as one paid attention to avoid it during this process, one would naturally be able to avoid this change in the end. And the significance of this cultivation system for the broken emperor was very clear. Through this kind of cultivation, he could continuously understand the essence of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. Finally, through this kind of understanding, he could slowly control the essence of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light that had fused with his life origin. Bit by bit, he would separate it from his life origin, and finally let his life origin return to normal. There's still a long way to go. The broken emperor sighed and raised his hand. With a wave of his hand, the runes, words, and patterns of this entire world were completely erased by him in an instant. If there were living beings in this world, even if the 18 false sages saw this scene, their hearts would definitely ache so much that it would be as if their parents had died. One must know that among these cultivation methods that filled the sky, Any one of them was enough to develop a cultivation system that was more accurate, more mysterious, and closer to the essence of cultivation in this world than the current cultivation system. But now there was an infinite number of trillions of cultivation techniques. Yet they were erased just like that. How could they not feel heartache? How could they not feel that it was unacceptable? However, this was meaningless to the broken emperor. His heart skipped a beat. The body formed by this part of his body began to gradually give birth to flesh and blood. Not long after, it had already turned into a body of flesh and blood. Immediately after, he began to slowly circulate the cultivation method that he had created, which belonged to this world's cultivation system, the most perfect and most suitable cultivation method for himself. As the cultivation method circulated, his flesh and blood body began to strengthen rapidly, and the power within it began to be rapidly derived. During this process, all kinds of flesh and blood mystiques gradually emerged. His body began to undergo changes that were impossible for the living beings in this world. The phantom of the broken emperor gradually rose from his body. Due to the current state of the broken emperor's body, this cultivation method could continuously communicate with his body that wasn't made of flesh and blood. Through such communication, he could continuously experience the innate indestructible essence that had integrated into his life origin. In the end, he could continuously comprehend these innate indestructible essences and obtain more experiences from them, improving the cultivation realm of this flesh and blood body. This process was very smooth. In fact, if this cultivation method was cultivated by other living beings in this world, what they would communicate with would be the great Tao of this world and the innate indestructible essence contained in the great Tao. The reason why the broken emperor could change the target of communication to his own life origin was very simple. Because his life origin had already integrated billions of innate indestructible essences. Although this innate indestructible essence could not be compared to the innate indestructible essence contained in this world in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, it was countless times better than the innate indestructible essence contained in this world. Although the difficulty of cultivating in this way was much slower than directly communicating with the great Tao of this world, if he eventually grew up, he would be able to directly step into the false saint realm of multiple worlds. He wouldn't be shackled to the false saint realm of a single world like the living beings in this world. With the cultivation of broken emperor, the cultivation state of his fleshly body began to improve at a steady pace. In just a few days, he had already broken through the barrier between the mortal realm and the immortal realm, brazenly rushing into the itinerant immortal realm. The moment his body broke through to the bodiless immortal realm, he instantly felt strands of innate indestructible essence slowly flow into his body through the connection between his body and the bodiless immortal realm. This caused his body to possess insignificant strands of innate indestructible essence, and at the same time, his bodiless immortal essence was reduced by the strands of innate indestructible essence in his bodiless immortal essence. It really works. At this moment, the broken emperor suddenly opened his eyes, and an inexplicable joy appeared on his face. Although he had already deduced this scene in his deduction, seeing it really happen and become a reality, the broken emperor still felt inexplicably surprised. Because this meant that his deduction was correct. This cultivation method could really solve his current predicament. It's just that it's too slow. According to this process, I'm afraid it will take trillions of years to completely transfer all the innate indestructible essence to this body. After that, to fully understand the mystery within, the time needed will be trillions of times longer. It really is a heavy burden and a long way to go. Then, he sighed with emotion again. Although he had extracted traces of innate indestructible essence in just a few days, this bit of innate indestructible essence was not even 1/1000th of what a world had given him. Even if he could maintain this speed in the future, it wouldn't become more difficult to extract the innate indestructible essence contained in his life origin at this moment. It would still take an unknown number of trillions of years to completely extract all the innate indestructible essence contained in his life origin. And this was just the first step in comprehending the mystery of this innate indestructible spiritual light. Next, he still had to comprehend the mystery of this life origin. Then, through this mystery, he would finally comprehend the mystery of this innate indestructible spiritual light completely. This would also require an infinite amount of time. Endless energy. Thinking of this, the broken emperor sighed slightly. At this time, he had already understood why Luo Fan had so casually guided him. It was because he clearly knew the difficulty of this. He knew that even if he was a genius, it was impossible for him to obtain all the mysteries of this innate indestructible spiritual light before him. At this moment, the broken emperor suddenly frowned. It seems that someone has entered this group of worlds. I still don't know who it is. Such a thought flashed through his mind. At this moment, his life origin contained a dense innate indestructible essence, and the connection between it and this innate indestructible spiritual light was unimaginably close. Such a close connection. This caused him to be extremely sensitive to all changes in this innate indestructible spiritual light. Once any outsider intruded into this innate indestructible spiritual light, he would naturally sense it. He frowned, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, it turned into a sigh. Forget it, let them be. It's impossible for them to refine this innate indestructible spiritual light in a short period of time, but they won't disturb me. Thinking of this, he closed his eyes again. He began to control this body of flesh and continued to quietly cultivate the cultivation method he had derived. Just a short while after the broken emperor sensed that someone had entered this group of worlds formed by the innate indestructible spiritual light, Luo Fan also sensed it. Another 2 sovereigns? He raised his head and looked up. His eyes pierced through the layers in time, and he saw 2 figures appearing out of thin air in the void between the many worlds. Luo Fan had never seen these 2 figures before. However, judging from the aura they exuded, they were definitely sovereigns. Moreover, they were sovereigns who were not inferior to the broken emperor. These 2 sovereigns seemed to have been fighting. Even after entering this group of worlds, they were still facing each other, and their auras were constantly clashing. Fellow Taoist sovereign, now that we've both entered this innate indestructible spiritual light, it seems that I've won the bet from before, one of the sovereigns who looked like a child said. Child sovereign. The middle-aged man who was addressed as sovereign shouted coldly. His voice contained boundless anger. If it weren't for the fact that he was wary of this group of worlds and suppressed his might, this shout alone might have been enough to trigger the strongest reaction from this group of worlds. You cheated, the sovereign said coldly. That's right, I cheated. However, a bet is a bet. Are you going to deny it, fellow Taoist? The child sovereign said indifferently. His unbridled attitude made the sovereign's expression turn ugly. Looking at his unparalleled anger, it seemed like he was about to pounce on the child sovereign and fight him to the death. However, after being angry for a while, the sovereign gradually calmed down. I'm not like you. Since you've won the bet, then you have 10,000 years to refine this innate indestructible spiritual light. As he spoke, he turned around and left. It seemed like he was going to leave this innate indestructible spiritual light. When the child sovereign saw this, he smiled and said, Fellow Taoist sovereign, please wait. The sovereign stopped and turned around. What else do you have to say? Don't tell me you still want to play tricks? The child emperor's chuckle made him look rather adorable. How could that be? I'm just inviting you to stay here and watch how I refine this spiritual light. When the sovereign heard this, he knew that the child sovereign wanted to show off his victory in front of him. However, he was instantly enraged. You! The child sovereign smiled. He didn't back down at all because of the sovereign's yell. He just looked at the sovereign. The sovereign was overwhelmed by the child sovereign's expression. He couldn't control himself. He snorted and turned around. His figure gradually disappeared into the void. From a complete body, it became more and more illusory. In the blink of an eye, only an insignificant shadow was left. Just when the child sovereign thought he was going to disappear, the sovereign's body suddenly turned from illusory to solid. As if time was flowing backward, the shadow began to evolve again. After a while, the shadow transformed into the sovereign's body. Such a change surprised the child sovereign. Seeing this, Tong Huang was surprised. "Is there something else, fellow Taoist? Are you not going to carry out the bet?" The sovereign sneered and said, "Of course I'm not you. However, when you invited me to stay here and watch how you refine it, I suddenly feel that it's not a bad idea to stay here and watch. At least, I can know how you failed. At the very least, I can know how you failed, so that when I start, I can also avoid such failure. Therefore, in the next 10,000 years, I will keep my eyes on you." Hearing this, the child sovereign couldn't help but be stunned. Then, a look of regret appeared in his eyes. If he wanted to leave, why didn't he just let him go? Who would have thought that his momentary desire to show off would actually cause such a huge problem that he could not get rid of? I thought the sovereign was loyal and honest. I didn't expect. Such a thought flashed through his mind. However, the more words they exchanged, the worse the sovereign's mood was. The better his mood was. To avoid making the sovereign even more complacent, the child sovereign said nonchalantly, "Then, I'll let you see how I completely refine this innate inextinguishable spiritual light in 10,000 years. As he said this, he sneered disdainfully. Then, he turned around and entered one of the worlds. With the sovereign watching, the matter of refining the innate inextinguishable spiritual light had become quite urgent. Naturally, he didn't want to waste time. After entering this world, the child sovereign raised his eyes and scanned the whole world. Suddenly, his expression changed. The moment he raised his eyes and scanned the whole world, he seemed to have touched something. Instantly, a bit of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light rushed out from the great Tao of this world and shot toward him. "This is?" The child sovereign raised his hand to cover the ray of light. Confusion appeared in his heart. He carefully sensed it, and an indescribable surprise suddenly appeared in his heart. So, it's the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. If I absorb it into my body, doesn't that mean I also have the innate inextinguishable spiritual light? However, he was still cautious. After making several deductions, he finally felt that there was no problem. Thus, he no longer restrained the innate inextinguishable spiritual light and allowed the ray of light to rush into his body. In the blink of an eye, it fused with his life force, giving his life force a bit of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. When this innate inextinguishable spiritual light fused with his life force, he had an indescribable feeling. It was as if his connection with this world had suddenly become even closer. All kinds of information in this world began to pour into his mind without him needing to control it, causing his understanding of this world to become more and more profound. Tong Huang closed his eyes contentedly, enjoying this indescribable feeling. Suddenly, he thought of something, and his expression changed. He turned around and walked out of this world. He stopped the child sovereign who was about to enter another world and said, "Fellow Taoist Emperor, this innate inextinguishable spiritual light has been without an owner for too long. Now it is extremely eager to be refined. Once it enters any world, it will automatically send its life force over to be refined. You lost the bet earlier, so you can't refine the innate inextinguishable spiritual light for 10,000 years. It's best if you don't enter any world." "What? There's such a thing?" When the child sovereign heard this, his eyes shone with disbelief. He stared at Tong Huang as if he wanted to see signs that the child sovereign was toying with him. However, in the end, everything he saw pointed to a fixed target. Tong Huang wasn't toying with him. What he said was true. That's impossible. Although the innate inextinguishable spiritual light doesn't have the will of a living being, it has a will similar to the will of heaven and earth. It doesn't need an owner in the first place, so why would it voluntarily let others refine it? Seeing that Tong Huang wasn't lying, the child sovereign could only take it as the truth. Chapter 1638. However, Tong Huang and Guo Huang didn't enter this cluster of worlds formed by the innate inextinguishable spiritual light with their true bodies. This was for sure. As supreme emperors, they must have been very busy with their cultivation. It was easy to imagine that even if there was an innate inextinguishable spiritual light here, they wouldn't just give up on their cultivation and enter it themselves. This was especially so when they had all sorts of incredible clones, and the difference in strength between their clones and their real bodies was not so great that it was unacceptable. Therefore, at this time, both the emperor and the child emperor were only his doppelgangers. However, these clones were not like the clones of Luo Fan's clones. They each had their own unique characteristics. Although they were both infused with spirit light, the two clones each had their own unique characteristics and profundities, but their nature was fundamentally different. At this moment, Tong Huang stared closely at Luo Huang. His eyes flickered with spiritual light. In a trance, there seemed to be an unparalleled power contracting and surging in his eyes. Looking at Tong Huang's expression and hearing what he said, Luo Huang fell silent. Since his opponent was so serious, he obviously couldn't treat this matter as if it didn't matter to him anymore. He pondered quietly in his heart. He was weighing. A bet was extremely important to an existence like him, but it did not matter at all. If it was important, it was for cultivation and the bet. If it was related to the bet. For an existence like him, breaking the bet would be the result of his cultivation foundation being overturned. If it was not important, it was naturally for an existence like him, who had nothing to do with the bet or the bet. For an existence like him, no matter what the bet was, as long as he was not willing, he could just fall out with the other party. For an existence like him, no matter what the bet was, as long as he was not willing, he could just fall out with the other party, and it would not affect him. This Luo Huang did not belong to either of the two. However, he had an inexplicable relationship with both. His cultivation was closely related to the bet and the bet. If he violated the terms of the bet, it would have a huge impact on his cultivation, and in the end, it would cause him great harm. However, this was only a kind of cultivation. His true cultivation foundation had nothing to do with the bet. In other words, even if he violated the terms of the bet, it wouldn't affect his cultivation foundation. It was precisely because they were related, yet not truly related, that he fell into hesitation. Give up that kind of cultivation for this innate inextinguishable spirit light? This was what the emperor was hesitating about. The value of the connate inextinguishable spiritual light was obviously higher than his own cultivation. There can be no doubt of that. After all, the innate inextinguishable spiritual light was enough to make him eternal and indestructible to a certain extent. If that was the case, he shouldn't be able to resist at all. He should have treated the bet as if it didn't exist. However, there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. This feeling told him that things were definitely not that simple. This connate inextinguishable spirit light couldn't be refined by a monarch like this. There must be another meaning behind the innate inextinguishable spirit light's transformation. It was precisely because of this feeling that he was unable to make a decision at this moment. As an emperor, the speed of the emperor's thinking had reached an unimaginable level. Even though he had thought of countless ideas, although he had weighed many things, in the end, by the time he had completely thought it through and made a decision, less than a breath of time had passed. Okay. I won't enter any world, the emperor finally said. Hearing this, Tong Huang, who was ready to attack, suddenly froze. He didn't expect the emperor to actually abide by the bet. After all, he believed that if he was in the emperor's shoes, the bet would have been thrown far away. However, he was a supreme ruler after all. His thoughts were meticulous and there was no need for word. At this moment, all kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, and he understood that the emperor made this decision because he did not trust him to be able to refine the inextinguishable spiritual light so easily. After understanding this, he was overjoyed and said, "That's good. I hope you won't go back on your word. Otherwise, I won't be courteous with you." After the emperor made his decision, he felt very relaxed. He even felt as if he had comprehended something profound that he had never known before. Under such circumstances, his wonderful mood made him not care what Tong Huang said in front of him. He only smiled faintly and said, "Fellow cultivator, you just have to do as you please." As he spoke, he casually opened up a world in the void and directly entered it. Compared to the world formed by the connate inextinguishable spiritual light, this world was not inferior in size at all. However, it didn't contain the essence of connate inextinguishable spiritual light like the countless worlds around it. In fact, there were no living beings born in it. It was just a world that the emperor had opened up to accommodate himself. Seeing the emperor's actions, Tong Huang expressionlessly returned to the world where he had obtained the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. After entering this world again, he began to carefully sense the changes that had happened to his body. He began to carefully study the mysteries of this world. As he studied, his mood became better and better. This was because he could clearly feel that his relationship with this world was completely different. The world in front of him was constantly transmitting all kinds of unique mysteries that belonged to this world. It was also transmitting all kinds of mysteries that the connate inextinguishable spiritual light had bestowed upon this world. This made him even more confident that he had really refined a part of the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. After studying it for a while, he didn't stay any longer. He turned around and stepped out of this world. In an instant, he entered another world. Immediately after, a ray of light was naturally born in this new world. It directly pierced through the void and rushed into his body. In an instant, it fused with his life source. In an instant, Tong Huang felt an indescribable sense of comfort. He also suddenly realized that his relationship with this world had changed again. Originally, it wasn't close. In the blink of an eye, it became unimaginably close. Tong Huang slowly closed his eyes. His face was filled with an intoxicated expression. This time, he didn't stay in this world for long. In order to refine countless worlds in these 10,000 years, in order to make the emperor speechless, he needed to speed up as much as possible. Therefore, he immediately turned around and left this world. He directly turned around and left this world, entering a new one. In this way, his behavior was similar to the choice of the broken emperor at the very beginning. He moved from one world to another, and the origin of life accepted the innate indestructible essence of one world after another, allowing the origin of life to continuously change along with it. And just when Tong Huang was doing this, the broken emperor, who was in that ordinary world, instantly sensed it. "He actually made the same mistake as me," the broken emperor murmured. There was a faint smile on his face. He seemed to be a little sad. He also seemed to be a little pitiful. More importantly, he seemed to be gloating. However, he didn't have any intention of reminding Tong Huang. He had also been in this stage before. He naturally knew that he couldn't communicate with Tong Huang at this time. No matter what he said, Tong Huang would only think that he had ulterior motives and wanted to deal with him. If he went to talk to Tong Huang, he might even be attacked by him. He had never even heard of Tong Huang's name, let alone had any friendship with him. How could the broken emperor do this? On the contrary, The darkness in his heart made him want to see more people who made the same mistake as him, so. At this time, after that complicated expression, the broken emperor closed his eyes again and continued to cultivate the cultivation method that he had created, which belonged to this world and was most suitable for him. Just as the broken emperor discovered the choice of Tong Huang and the others, Luo Fan also discovered it. Compared to the broken emperor's complicated mood, Luo Fan was simply watching a joke. I wonder how long it will take for him to react? Will he have to wait until the last moment, when he is about to be completely refined by this connate inextinguishable spiritual light? As he thought of this, he wore such a smile on his face. Taoist Luo Fan, why are you suddenly smiling so horribly? At this time, a clear voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Hearing this, Luo Fan turned his head and saw that Peony was looking at him with an inexplicable expression. His heart moved, and he knew that his previous smile of watching a joke had made the other party suspicious. He couldn't help but smile and say, "No, I just suddenly saw something funny." Saw something funny? Peony was even more puzzled. At this time, this underground space had been completely filled with this world's fire, and all the existences that belonged to the ancient demon world had been isolated behind it, making it difficult for them to invade this world. Under such circumstances, she didn't find it funny at all. Taoist friend, don't worry about it. But you guys, aren't you going to enter this world's fire to refine your body? Why haven't you started yet? Luo Fan said. Hearing this, Peony's expression changed slightly, as if she was a little embarrassed. She had already put aside the doubts in her heart and said, Taoist friend is here, how can we refine our body? Luo Fan was first stunned when he heard this, and then he came to a sudden understanding. He understood that the reason was actually because these women felt that he was a man, so it was inconvenient for them to refine their bodies in front of him. So they were unwilling to refine their bodies here. After understanding this, he was a little speechless. For Luo Fan, he hadn't cared about the difference between men and women for countless years. For a supreme being who could create billions of men and women with a single thought, what was the meaning of the difference between men and women? What he had seen, created, and understood was enough for him to view other women's bodies as inanimate objects. Under such circumstances, suddenly at this time, how could he possibly react when this peony before his eyes told him about the difference between men and women? I was too rash. I will leave first. Luo Fan could only sigh in the end, saying. He lifted his foot and took a light stride, his figure leaving the lowest level of the underground space. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the restaurant where he had previously met Peony and the others, returning to his seat and sitting down. Even though there were tens of thousands of layers of underground space between this restaurant and where he was just now, it was not an obstacle for him at all. After Luo Fan left, Peony's complexion became slightly ashamed. Did we go too far? She said to her fellow disciples. How so? Shouldn't he leave? We are women. Don't tell me he has the nerve to watch us train naked in front of him? One of her companions shouted. Actually, the difference between men and women. Actually, it doesn't have much meaning to us, another companion said. How is it meaningless? I'm not married yet. Actually, if he wanted to see with his divine abilities, he could see from anywhere. Peony furrowed her brows. He won't. Although he did not know the depth of this person. However, he was not the kind of person who would peep. Moreover, a woman's body is no secret to him at all. How could he peep? Since that's the case, you still let him go? Peony furrowed her brows. That's different, the woman said indignantly. This is a matter of attitude. Whether he looks or not is his business. How can we be so shameless? These words finally left the other two speechless. Let's hurry up. Reinforcements might be here soon. If we delay any longer, we'll be in danger. If we delay again, we might have to train in front of others, the woman said. As she spoke, she quickly stepped into the origin world's fire. The other two sighed and also stepped into the interior of the origin world's fire. He also stepped into the flame of this realm. Although they claimed that they would be naked after entering the fire of the origin world, their robes were not damaged at all. Although the fire of the origin realm was burning their clothes, it only had the effect of adding to their robes. After all, the origin world's fire wasn't like other flames, although it possessed an astonishing heat. However, this heat wasn't hard to resist. Moreover, it was enough to be possessed. As the world's most basic and most primal flame, its characteristics were concealed. Any matter belonging to this world that entered it would endlessly strengthen the essence of this world. In the end, it would continuously increase its strength and elevate its degree of profundity. This was also the fundamental reason why the origin world's fire could be used to refine the body. As a cultivator, as a living being, after entering this world, the characteristics that didn't belong to this world and the characteristics that were different from the essence of this world would be constantly adjusted and eliminated. In the end, they would only stop when they were completely in line with the essence of this world. For cultivators and living beings, this process was equivalent to purifying their bodies once again, causing their bodies to become even more compatible with this world. Afterwards, they would unwittingly obtain this world's almost innately indestructible essence. Although their robes weren't damaged by the origin world's fire, this didn't mean that their bodies wouldn't show any abnormalities and could be seen by anyone. In reality, when they refined their bodies, the flames burning their bodies and burning their robes produced completely different effects. In other words, when they entered, the burning of the origin world's fire would completely reveal the outline of their perfect bodies. Compared to directly seeing their completely naked bodies, what was the difference? The three of them tempered their bodies here for nearly a month. After a month, when their bodies had become incomparably pure and no longer had any essence that didn't suit this world, they reluctantly left the origin world's fire. It's finally done. I feel like some sort of barrier has been broken. Peony murmured. Me too. It seems like the realm of saints isn't so illusory anymore. Another person said the same. I feel the same, Peony said. At this moment, the charm of the three of them had increased by countless times compared to a month ago. Standing there, they looked at each other. They stood there, and although their faces and figures were practically no different from before, they already felt like three completely different people. The three of them had cultivated from zero until now. Who knew how many trillions of years they'd spent? In such a long period of time. Even if they hadn't really left this world and hadn't searched for the power of other worlds to fuse into their bodies and into their own power system, their bodies and powers must have accumulated countless auras that didn't belong to this world, power that didn't belong to this world, and mysteries that didn't belong to this world. This aura, this power, this mystery. In the past, it might have made them stronger, but after they'd risen to this level and needed to break through to the false saint level, all these things became fatal weaknesses. To become a false saint, that was to fuse with heaven and earth, as if to obtain the greatest blessing of the great Tao of heaven and earth. If they had an aura that didn't belong to this world, the power of this world, and the mysteries of this world, how could this blessing descend? It was precisely because of this that the three of them underwent such a huge change after entering the origin world's fire to refine their bodies at this moment. Just now, they felt that the barrier of the false saint level seemed to have disappeared. Peony turned around and sighed. Looks like we owe them a big favor this time. The other two sighed and nodded their heads. They agreed with Peony's words. Someone seems to be talking about me? At this moment, a voice entered their ears. Hearing this voice, the expressions of Peony and the other two changed slightly. You're peeping. That voice. It was Luo Fan's voice. Peeping? What peeping? Luo Fan's figure slowly appeared in front of the three of them. At this moment, Peony and the other two's faces were already flushed red. Their 6 eyes that were looking at Luo Fan were filled with shame and anger. As for Luo Fan, he was a little confused about their shame and anger. Previously, he had been quietly comprehending this world in that city, working hard to polish his cultivation realm that was about to break through the single-world false saint level and become a multi-world false saint. The reason why he appeared here was just as he had said. When Peony and the other two's words mentioned him, he naturally sensed it, so he knew that they had already finished refining their bodies. That was why he came here. However, he did not expect to be glared at by them as soon as he arrived. How could he react to this? You're not peeping? How could it be such a coincidence that you came just as we finished refining our bodies? Peony said angrily. Luo Fan could not help but be at a loss for words for a moment. The matter of him sensing it when others talked about him had long been integrated into his instincts. He had long been used to it, even treating it as a kind of common sense. Now that he was questioned by the other party, he realized that this kind of ability had a huge limit. If the difference in cultivation realm was not huge to a certain level, it would be impossible for it to appear. In other words, if his cultivation realm was not higher than the other party's, he would not be able to sense it at all when the other party talked about him. And at this time, if he wanted to sense Peony and the others talking about him, his cultivation realm would at least have to be at the single-world false saint level. In other words, if Luo Fan wanted to explain why he suddenly came here at this time, he had to reveal the fact that his cultivation realm had at least reached the false saint level. If he did not reveal this fact, then he would not be able to explain it no matter how he explained. I'm just naturally sensitive. Once someone talks about me, I'll sense it. Just now, I sensed you guys talking about me, so I knew that you guys had finished refining your bodies. That's why I came here, but I didn't peep at you. Luo Fan could only force himself to say this. How can there be such talent in this world? Even if there is, how did you know that we said that you had finished refining your bodies? You must have thought that you were lucky and planned to use this excuse to come here, planning to peep at our bodies. Peony said angrily. Luo Fan opened his mouth helplessly, but in the end, he decided not to explain anymore. I was just planning to joke with you guys. Humph. I didn't even know you were this kind of person. Peony was also quite embarrassed and angry. However, they believed Luo Fan's explanation. Although they seemed to care a lot about refining their bodies in front of Luo Fan, in reality, they also knew that even if they refined their bodies in front of Luo Fan would not have any other thoughts because of this. Therefore, after thinking about it, if Luo Fan wanted to find an excuse to see them refining their bodies, the only possibility was that he was just joking with them and wanted to see their embarrassed and angry expressions. Chapter 1639. Peony and the others did not dwell on this matter for long. Not long after, they had already put this matter aside. After all, this was only a small matter. Of course, the more important reason was that the others had already arrived. The woman who had gone to the sect to inform them had already spread the situation here to the world. Now, there were already several thousand cultivators who had come here through various means. From a certain point of view, Peony and the others were quite lucky. At the very least, they had already finished their body refining process before the arrival of the numerous cultivators. They would not wait until the crowd arrived to conduct the body refining process in front of them. Among the cultivators who had arrived, the strongest was the one who was only half a step away from becoming a false saint. They had already comprehended the holy decree but had yet to break through the barrier and truly become a false saint. Below them were Peony and the others, who were at the pinnacle of the pseudo-saint level. However, no matter how weak they were, the existences that could come here were at least at the false saint level. With so many existences appearing here, their presence alone had already made the underground space seem like an extremely crowded jar. As for the boundless flames of this world below, they seemed like flames in the background at this moment. Is this the place where you said the ancient demon realm is about to descend? A supreme venerable looked down with a frown. He said. When Peony heard that, she did not dare to be negligent and said, reporting to Sect Master, this is the place. It's just that because of fellow Taoist Luo Fan's means, all the changes here have been concealed. The Supreme Venerable was also an extremely beautiful woman. Countless fragrances of flowers were faintly wafting around her. One could even vaguely hear boundless heavenly sounds coming from her body. They condensed into substantial figures in the surroundings and changed the surrounding spacetime. This was what she had comprehended. The manifestation of the holy decree. This is the fellow Taoist? The Supreme Venerable turned to look at Luo Fan, who was where Peony had indicated. Her eyes were filled with doubt. Suddenly, a kind of horror flashed in her eyes. As a Supreme Venerable, she had already reached the end of the false saint realm. In other words, among all the living beings below the false saint realm, there were countless true saint realm cultivators. Only those who were on par with her. Existences that were on par with her. However, there was absolutely no existence that could surpass her. However, at this moment, she looked at Luo Fan. However, he suddenly felt that Luo Fan was very mysterious. In a trance, he felt as if he was probing a vast and boundless ocean, probing a deep and unfathomable abyss. This instantly made her suspicious. Could it be that this person was a fake saint? But how is that possible? There were 18 false saints in the world, but none of them looked like the false saint at that moment. I heard that there was another expert who proved his Tao and became a saint a few years ago. Could it be him? Suddenly, this thought flashed through the Supreme Venerable's mind. With this thought, how could she dare to slight Luo Fan? He quickly came down from the cloud and went directly to Luo Fan. He respectfully greeted him and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for sealing the ancient demon realm for the world. If it weren't for fellow Taoist, the world might have been overturned by the ancient demon realm." Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled faintly and said, "Why are you being so polite, fellow Taoist? I'm also in this world, and it's my duty to seal the ancient demon realm." As soon as he said that, he suddenly trembled slightly. He suddenly looked like he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Because when he said these words, he sensed that the amount of karmic luck he possessed had suddenly increased to 1,600 portions. 1,600 portions was equivalent to the amount of luck possessed by 1,600 false saints. Compared to before, it had increased by nearly 100 portions. Previously I did so much, but it was just a small reaction. Now, with just a sentence, so much luck actually descended. "Are you a woman?" At this moment, he was speechless. It was better to say more than to do more. This kind of extremely unfair thing in the mortal world was actually useful in this high-end world's will. This almost made him want to change his style. However, it was a good thing after all, so he did not dwell too much on it. 1,600 portions of luck seemed to be extremely beneficial to him. It made him vaguely feel that the cultivation realm of his body of flesh and blood had begun to rise rapidly under the push of some invisible force. With a slight tremble, he had already touched the level of the false saint with multiple worlds. He only needed to take a small step forward, or even a little, and he would be able to directly step into the level of the false saint with multiple worlds. At this moment, Luo Fan's expression changed again. "It's starting," he said. As he said that, the flames of the world that covered the entire underground space began to surge violently. It looked like a large ladle of water had suddenly been poured into boiling hot oil. In this violent surge, wisps of aura that did not belong to this world were quickly born and quickly consumed, gradually turning into nothingness. In such a state, even without Luo Fan's reminder, even if Luo Fan was not here, even if there were only other cultivators present, they would still be able to notice the abnormality and know that there was another world below that was preparing to rush over. It really is the ancient demon world. The expression of the myriad flower sects sect master, who was talking to Luo Fan, changed drastically at this moment, and he shouted. Following this loud shout, the expressions of the people behind him, who originally had some doubts on their faces, changed drastically. In an instant, a powerful force erupted from their bodies. All the cultivators here. It was not just the cultivators of the myriad flower sect. Among them, there were many other sections. In other words, not only were there many cultivators from sects that were not disciples of the myriad flower sage, but other sects that were disciples of other false sages. There were also many sects that had no direct relationship with those false sages. These forces instantly filled the entire vast underground space. They were at least at the false saint level. The changes produced by such a level of power filling a sealed space were naturally mysterious and profound. In the blink of an eye, this underground space seemed to have been expanded countless times, from a sealed space to a vast and boundless universe, and the power of the many cultivators turned into the space-time, stars and continents in this universe. It spread out. Compared to before, the scene was countless times grander and more vast. Just as the changes happened, an incomparably hot flame suddenly broke through the cover of the Origin World Fire and directly rushed out of the Origin World Fire to form a flaming island. This incomparably hot flame was nothing else. It was the Demon World Fire. And compared to the Demon World Fire that had been refined and transformed into the Origin World Fire, not only was there more of it, but its nature was also higher. In fact, Luo Fan could even sense a certain characteristic that was similar to his Origin World Fire, the innate indestructibility characteristic. With such a characteristic, it was clear that the Demon World Fire had also integrated its innate indestructibility into the flame. It was just like how Luo Fan had integrated the innate indestructibility of this world into the Origin World Fire. Only the Demon World Fire that had integrated the innate indestructibility of this world could break through Luo Fan's Origin World Fire and forcefully support it under the envelopment of the Origin World Fire. It would not be quickly extinguished because of such a change with the appearance of the Demon World Fire, the Origin World Fire that had spread throughout the entire underground space, or rather, the Origin World Fire that had been transformed into a boundless universe by everyone's power, began to produce an astonishing riot. The countless Origin World Fire attacked the Demon World Fire with all its might. The contact between the two was like the contact between water and boiling oil. Both seemed extremely calm, but the movement caused by the contact was enough to hurt anyone. Crackle. Boom, 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 boom. At this time, all kinds of incredible and terrifying sounds broke out from the point of contact. The nature of the demon domain fire and the fire of this world was completely opposite. The conflict between the two was almost endless, and it would never stop until one of them disappeared. Although Luo Fan had set up a large number of Origin World Fire and appeared early, the other party was not weak either. It seemed to be continuously surging up from below, trying its best to maintain the existence of the Demon World Fire. It tried its best to make the Demon World Fire last longer under the strangulation of the Origin World Fire. It's actually a false saint. Luo Fan's eyes flickered slightly, and he had already seen the existence behind the Demon World Fire that was constantly pushing the Demon World Fire over. That was the false saint of that world. Moreover, it was not just one false saint. There were a total of 34 false saints there. They were unleashing all kinds of unbelievable methods to create countless demon world flames that contained the innate indestructible essence. They were continuously sending the flames into this world through the channel that they opened. Fellow Taoists, what do you mean by this? At this moment, Luo Fan had no choice but to speak. His words did not exist for living beings below the pseudo-sage stage. However, for existences above the false saint realm, it was incomparably huge, enough to make one's eardrums hurt. Such a voice directly penetrated the battlefield between the flames of this realm and the flames of the demon realm and transmitted to the other world behind, which was the ancient demon realm. The 34 false sages who were working hard to create the flames of the demon realm and send them into this world could clearly hear this voice. At this moment, a leisurely voice also penetrated through the battlefield. I never thought that there would be fellow Taoists who would react so quickly. We originally thought that fellow Taoists were injured for some reason and wouldn't be able to recover so quickly. When Luo Fan heard this, he sighed and said, "No matter how fast we react, we can still react. With everyone's wisdom, can't you see that this is meaningless?" "How is it meaningless? As long as we have enough time, we will be able to stand firm and break through our current realm." "Break through your current realm," the voice said again. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood what the other party was thinking. The other party had no interest in whether the so-called ancient demon world would overturn this world. Their true goal was to break through the limit of the single world false saint and become a multiple world false saint. The single world false saint was almost the limit of all false saints. Only existences like Luo Fan, who had comprehended the essence of the cultivation system and the secrets of the cultivation system, could continue to advance through a certain cultivation system and finally break through the barrier during this period to become a multiple world false saint. However, this did not mean that those false saints, they could not feel that there was another realm above the single world false saint. To those false saints, the restrictions of a single world false saint were too great. They could not bring their strength out of the world at all. In fact, after leaving the world, their status would sink. This was already something that those false saints could not accept. Under such circumstances, with such a foundation, they thought of breaking through the restrictions of the world. It was very normal for a false saint to step from a single world false saint to a multiple world false saint. This was obviously the case for these false saints in the ancient demon world. For other false saints, it was obviously extremely difficult to find another world to help them break through the restrictions of a single world false saint. That was because they could not find a world that they could enter safely. However, the situation was obviously different for these false saints of the ancient demon world. However, they clearly knew that the ancient demon realm was connected to another world that had a false saint a long time ago. This way, they would naturally be able to think of a way to re-establish this connection that had been cut off by unknown means. At that time, they would be able to easily enter that world and use even easier methods to obtain the false saint godhead of that world. At that time, with the false saint godhead of two worlds, wouldn't it be natural for them to break through to a single world false saint? After understanding the intentions of these false saints, Luo Fan sighed and said, "If I want to complete your idea, I have to transform at least half of the world to look like your world. That would cause too much damage to the world. However, I can let it go. So, I'm sorry." As he spoke, he pressed his hand down. The countless flames of the world below trembled slightly and condensed into a palm that directly covered the island formed by the flames of the demon world. Crack, a deafening thunderclap rang out, and the huge island formed by the flames of the demon world was directly smashed by him, turning into countless tiny flame fragments that scattered. Under the burning of the endless flames of the demon world, these scattered flame fragments rapidly changed their nature and gradually turned back into the state of the flames of the demon world. They gathered in the huge palm and continued to go deeper into the palm. Not only did they completely collapse all the flames of the demon world, but they also broke through the passage between the two worlds and directly rushed into the ancient demon world. The environment of the ancient demon realm and this side of the world seemed to be vastly different. In this world, only the underground was dim and there was not much light. However, in the ancient demon world, the entire world was extremely dim. Moreover, although the world was filled with boundless rich vitality, the vitality contained all kinds of battle characteristics. This kind of battle characteristics caused the fighting spirit and ruthlessness in anyone who breathed in this vitality to continuously increase and grow. It went without saying that the civilization that was born under the shroud of such vitality was belligerent. At this moment, the expressions of the 34 false sages, who were constantly pushing the flames of the demon world, changed drastically. The 34 of them were all false sages. Although their combined strength could not compare to a real multi-world false sage, they were still many times stronger than a single-world false sage. However, at this time, there was only one false sage on the other side. With such a light push, they were already unable to resist. They could only watch helplessly as the essence flames of the other world rushed towards them through the passage. The flames of the demon world were the flames of this world. To the other world, it was equivalent to the flames of the demon world to this world. After the palm formed by the flames of the demon world broke through the passage and entered the other world, its power began to increase infinitely. Under that power, the time, space, matter, energy, and nomological laws of the other world began to change rapidly. Gradually, more and more characteristics that belonged to this world were brought along. Following this change, more and more flames of the demon world continuously passed through the passage and followed the palm into the other world. There were more and more flames, and the changes to the other world became faster and deeper. This way, the absorption of the flames became stronger and stronger. Just like that, in a short while, the boundless flames of the demon world beneath Luo Fan and the others' feet. It had completely disappeared. Replacing it was a deep and inexplicable passage that led to an unknown world and unknown space. What's going on? The sect master of the Wanhua sect muttered. Everything that was happening in front of her, it was already beyond her imagination. It suddenly made her feel like she was dreaming. The ancient demon world. No matter what legends were recorded in the ancient books, it was extremely terrifying. Once encountered, it was a world that could cause a catastrophic disaster to the world. However, right in front of her, the passage to the ancient demon world had clearly been opened. The other party seemed to be trying its best to rush into this world. However, in the blink of an eye, all the power of the ancient demon world disappeared with a gentle push of the palm of the person in front of her. Moreover, all the power even flowed into the other world, which was equivalent to this world invading the ancient demon world. "Everyone, what are you waiting for?" Luo Fan said faintly. Hearing this, everyone looked as if they had just woken up from a dream. Subsequently, they didn't have the time to think before they transformed into numerous streaks of light that charged directly into the dark and unfathomable passageway, and then they vanished from this world. The myriad flower sect master bowed respectfully towards Luo Fan and said, "I had eyes but failed to recognize you. I didn't recognize you, Supreme Saint. Please forgive me, Supreme Saint." Luo Fan smiled faintly and waved his hand. The sect master of the Wanhua sect was already sent into the passage. At this moment, he was in no mood to chat with the sect master of the Wanhua sect. This was because he could clearly feel that the luck on his body was continuously increasing as the fire of this world continued to expand in the ancient demon world. Although it had only been a short period of time, his luck had already increased from the original 1,600 to nearly 1,650. Such a large amount of luck had a strong effect on the cultivation of his flesh and blood body. It had reached a level that shocked even him. At this moment, his cultivation realm had already broken through the boundary of the single-world false saint and reached the level of the double-world false saint. That's right, it was not the multiple-world false saint, but the double-world false saint. When he broke through the barrier of the single-world false saint, he realized that the cultivation process of the multiple-world false saint was endless. After breaking through to the single-world false saint, it was not the multiple-world false saint that was not affected by any world, but the double-world false saint. After breaking through to the double-world false saint, it would be the triple-world false saint, and so on and so forth, all the way to the billions or even trillions of worlds false saint. As he felt this way, all kinds of inexplicable comprehensions slowly appeared in his heart. some kind of mystery that could only be understood and could not be explained, that belonged to this world, and the innate indestructible spiritual light gradually emerged in his heart. After carefully experiencing this comprehension, Luo Fan suddenly understood that the cultivation process was not so hopeless. When he cultivated the myriad world false saint, he would obtain the intrinsic characteristics of all the worlds formed by the innate indestructible spiritual light. At that time, he would be able to take advantage of the situation and become a multiple world false saint that was not restricted by any world in this group of worlds. However, this was only within this group of worlds. Outside this group of worlds, he was still as weak as an ordinary false saint and still needed to use all kinds of methods to maintain his false saint status. In other words, he was still a false saint. He was still far from becoming a true saint through this method. Of course, this restriction was not a big problem for Luo Fan. He cultivated the cultivation method of this world and used the cultivation system of this world to make his physical body break through continuously and become a multiple world false saint. However, it was only to comprehend the essence of this world and the profoundness of this innate indestructible spiritual light. He did not need to rely on this method to become a saint. I 861, Chapter 1640. After becoming a double-world false saint, Luo Fan knew that the ability of his body of flesh and blood had made a huge leap. The double-world false saint did not mean that he could only become a fixed false saint of one of the two worlds. Instead, he could change one of the two worlds that recognized him as a false saint according to his own situation. In other words, other than the world where his body of flesh and blood became a false saint, he could continue to become a true saint in any world in this group of worlds, and this only required him to carry out a certain kind of cultivation after leaving a certain world. Then, after entering another world, he would carry out another kind of cultivation. In other words, for the current Luo Fan, he could become a false saint no matter which world he entered. He only needed to spend a certain amount of time cultivating in that world and change the cultivation method he cultivated according to the characteristics of that world. This kind of ability was already many times stronger than a single world false saint. Although he was still shackled by the heavens and earth, and still couldn't be like a true sage or a false sage with many worlds and not be restricted by any of the worlds in this cluster of worlds, he could already bypass it. Luo Fan quietly sensed the changes in his cultivation realm after advancing from the cultivation realm to the double-world false saint level. He was very satisfied. This kind of change was extremely beneficial to the strength of his body of flesh and blood, as well as to his understanding of the mysteries of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. His heart skipped a beat. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure had already entered the passage that led to another world below. After stepping into the passage, he felt the time around him change rapidly. Then, he didn't know how long he had traveled. It seemed like millions of years, but it also seemed like it had only been an instant. He realized that he had already arrived in another world. It was an extremely dark world that was filled with violence and the aura of battle. In this world, at this moment, the area he was in, it was enveloped by the fire of this world. Whether it was time, space, matter, energy, or nomological laws, their nature was constantly changing under the effect of the fire of this world. This change in nature caused all kinds of existences. They were constantly changing in the way of another world. However, this kind of change, but it wasn't that easy. Although the progress was slow at this time, it was still insignificant compared to this world. At this moment, in the fire of the origin realm, the Wanhua sect master and the others were fighting with many powerful creatures or powerful demonic creatures. The reason why they were called demonic creatures was because the creatures they were fighting had the appearance of various demonic creatures in the legends. Some of them had green faces and fangs, some were covered in scales, some were covered in claws, some were covered in bone spurs, and some were even formed by the condensation of bloody light. However, all of these creatures were extremely powerful. Some of them were as strong as venerable ones, while the weakest ones were pseudo-saints. They had obviously been waiting here since a long time ago, ready to rush into the passage and invade another world when the 34 false saints opened the world passage. Outside the world fire, there were even more fiends that were eager to try. However, these monsters outside were a notch or two weaker than those in the fire of this realm. In fact, they seemed to be extremely afraid of the world fire. They could only rely on the power of the demon world fire to stand there and confront the world fire. In the void behind the hundreds of millions of demonic creatures, the 34 pseudo-sages looked at the commotion with extremely ugly expressions. When Luo Fan appeared here, the expressions of the 34 false saints changed drastically. "Fellow Taoist, have you already broken through?" a false saint said in disbelief. These words were the same as those before. They were extremely obvious to false saints, but they were completely unfamiliar to existences below the false saint realm. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "I just comprehended some things." As he spoke, he raised his hand and grabbed the air. In an instant, the space-time of the ancient demon world began to tremble indescribably. Amidst the tremors, endless power rapidly gathered toward the 34 pseudo-sages. At this moment, the 34 false saints felt an unimaginable pressure directly acting on their bodies. For a moment, their entire bodies felt a terrifying feeling of being suppressed by a supreme powerhouse that they could not move at all, something that they had not felt for many years. For a moment, indescribable fear surged in the hearts of every false saint. In their terror, they did not hesitate to activate their strongest abilities. In an instant, the great path of the world began to fluctuate rapidly. Endless power was produced from the great path and quickly condensed in their bodies. It seemed like their powers were increasing endlessly in an instant. Bang! Countless cracks began to appear where they were, instantly covering more than half of the world. These cracks were not other cracks, but space-time cracks. The further away these cracks were from the location of these false saints, the thinner they were. At first, they were as thick as a thumb, but after crossing tens of thousands of miles, the cracks were already as thin as spider webs, becoming almost undetectable. It was also fortunate that they were so thin, which was why the rifts surrounded most of the world. Although there were countless beings within the dimensions that spanned trillions of light years, not a single being was torn apart or destroyed by those rifts. It was a blessing amidst the misfortune. The power that Luo Fan had used to suppress these false sages just now was not his true power. Instead, it was the power that his body of flesh and blood possessed. If it was Luo Fan's true strength, a ray of spiritual light would pass over. In an instant, the 34 false saints would be completely destroyed. It was even to the extent that this world might collapse in an instant. All space-time, all matter, energy, and all laws would perish. Only the great Tao that was protected by the innate inextinguishable spiritual light would remain intact. And now, under the ferocious attacks of the 34 false sages, he was still unable to withstand all the pressure from using the power of his physical body. However, it was instantly blasted apart. The 34 false saints instantly regained their freedom. Luo Fan was not satisfied with such a process. However, for the 34 false saints, they were already extremely shocked. One must know that there were 34 of them. The 34 false saints worked together. This power was many times stronger than when they came alone. Such power. In the end, it only shattered the pressure that their opponents exerted on them. They could not even turn around to attack Luo Fan. Such an effect. To him, it was simply unimaginable. As expected of a saint who has surpassed the shackles of heaven and earth. One of the false saints sighed with an extremely ugly expression. At this moment, the 34 false saints had unknowingly gathered together. Moreover, behind the 34 of them, there was a magic treasure of different shapes that appeared. It was floating and sinking, emitting a power that could shake spacetime and the world, causing all living beings to involuntarily look in their direction. Of course, as false saints, their existence had already exceeded the understanding of all living beings who had not yet reached the false saint realm. At this moment, although countless living beings were looking in their direction, however, what the living beings saw were only 34 indescribable balls of light floating in the void. As for what was in the balls of light, whether it was a person, an object, or some other existence that could not be classified, no one knew or could understand. It's a pity that I still couldn't subdue you guys. Luo Fan sighed at this moment. The form of existence that he had activated the power of his body had already exceeded the understanding of ordinary cultivators. At this moment, in the eyes of outsiders, he was just a ball of light that was even larger and more dazzling than the 34 balls of light. Such a light covered the spacetime inside the flame of the world, causing the living beings in the flame of the world that belonged to the original world to clearly feel some kind of indescribable power surging up at this moment, increasing their resistance to all changes in the outside world. They even vaguely felt that they had received powerful support. Fellow Taoist, what goal do you want to achieve? Another false saint asked Luo Fan. Just returning the favor, Luo Fan said with a faint smile. This was his true intention. Since he had relied on that world to allow his body to obtain a huge amount of luck, which then pushed his body to break through from the single-world false saint realm and become a double-world false saint, he naturally had to act according to the rules of that world. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth, it was only natural. Returning the favor? We invaded the human world to obtain the opportunity to break through. Now that fellow Taoist has already broken through, why do you want to cause more trouble? Another false saint frowned when he heard Luo Fan's words. I was born between heaven and earth, so I naturally have to be responsible for heaven and earth. Luo Fan smiled and said, Everyone, there's no need to talk nonsense. Now that things have come to this, do you still think that I can stop? As he spoke, his heart stirred, and he raised his hand and pointed at the fire of this world. In an instant, the fire of this world trembled slightly, and the flames instantly soared. With the impact of the powerful force, the demon world fire that enveloped the fire of this world was forced to retreat. Moreover, the transformation that would have taken a long time to complete was completed in an instant. The part of the world that was covered by the world fire transformed into the original world, which was called the human realm by this world. After the change, the sun of the human world seemed to be able to cast its light here, causing this part of spacetime to suddenly become bright. Even the essence energy in it changed completely. This change made the sect master of the Wanhua sect and the others instantly feel an indescribable joy surging in their hearts. Amidst this joy, their strength seemed to have increased by a lot. For a moment, the living beings that could resist the corrosion of the fire of this world were forced to retreat. There were countless living beings that could not adapt to such a sudden change and directly exploded, turning into fuel for the fire of this world. This caused the fire of this world to suddenly soar again. As for those living beings that could withstand it, they had no choice but to retreat quickly at this moment. They tried their best to retreat out of the envelopment of the fire of this world, and tried their best to retreat, wanting to avoid it, and in this process, they lost a few more lives. Kill! The sect master of the Myriad Flower sect and the others were overjoyed at this moment. They shouted and quickly chased forward, fighting with the living beings that kept retreating. Responsibility. Above, the false sage's expressions turned ugly. Everything else was fine. They had to bear this responsibility. However, they could not use any words to criticize Luo Fan. Looks like we can only fight. With a furious roar, the magic treasures behind the 34 false sages seemed to have received an order and suddenly left their back. They directly blasted towards where Luo Fan was. Although the 34 false sages were extremely far away from Luo Fan. However, they were their natal magic treasures. If they were in the universe, they were pseudo-primordial spiritual treasures that could completely destroy any world other than the Earth universe. It was a matter of course for them to surpass time and space. Therefore, the moment those magic treasures left their backs, Luo Fan could already feel them breaking through the fire of this world and directly blasting towards him. Seeing this, Luo Fan did not activate his ability at all. He did not even use his independent dimension of heaven and earth. He only relied on the ability of his physical body to raise his hand and point at these magic treasures. In an instant, the great Tao of this world trembled slightly, and a silk net appeared in front of him, instantly enveloping the 34 magic treasures. The benefits of becoming a double-world false sage was of course not only to obtain the strength of a false sage in 2 worlds, but also to not lose the false sage status. In fact, after becoming a double-world false sage, one would be able to use the power of 2 worlds. They could use the power of 2 worlds. In this way, their strength would naturally be many times stronger than that of a single-world false sage. As for Luo Fan, he had just broken through to the single-world false sage level and had just entered the double-world false sage level. However, he had only set up a world to allow him to have the false sage status. Therefore, after stepping into this world, he did not need to be like other worlds. His fleshly body's life essence would naturally resonate with this world, and he would naturally obtain the false saint status of this world. This was also the fundamental reason why he was able to mobilize the great Tao of this world to help him like the false sages in this world. This was also the reason why he could easily use the strength of his body to directly suppress the 34 false sages, forcing them to use their strength to resist. And at this moment, the net that appeared in front of Luo Fan was none other than the karma net that Luo Fan had cast with the help of the great Tao of this world. It was a true sage mystique that could naturally evolve endless attacks and change itself according to all the changes of the opponent. This kind of true sage mystique was more exquisite than any attack technique in this world. Even the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure was many times inferior to this kind of true sage mystique in terms of exquisiteness. In other words, unless the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure could directly shatter the true sage mystique at the moment of contact and completely shatter it before the true sage mystique could make any changes, it was impossible for the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure to withstand the true sage mystique. Just like now, although each of the 34 pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures was powerful enough to destroy the world, they didn't have any ability to resist the net of karma. With just a few changes, they were firmly wrapped up by the net of karma and presented directly in front of Luo Fan. How is this possible? The 34 false sages exclaimed. Obviously, what was happening in front of them was like a nightmare to them. Naturally, Luo Fan would not give them too much time to feel emotional. After sealing the 34 pseudo-primordial spiritual treasures, he conveniently stuffed them into his universe in his sleeve. With the seal of the karma net, no matter how strong those false sages were, no matter how close their connection with the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure was, it was impossible for them to contact the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure. It was even more impossible for them to control the pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure to affect him in any way. Luo Fan stood there quietly with an indifferent expression. He looked up at the 34 false sages and said, "Nothing is impossible." Could it be that after breaking through the shackles, one of the false sages said in disbelief, "This is just my ability. Not everyone is so powerful after breaking through." As Luo Fan said that, he lifted his foot and took a light step. In the blink of an eye, he left the fire of this world and finally stepped into the land of the ancient demon realm for the first time. If his body had not broken through, when he stepped into this world, his body would definitely feel that there was some kind of barrier. However, at this time, he had already become a double-world false sage, so that kind of barrier no longer existed. Standing on the land of the ancient demon realm, He felt the same as standing on the land of the human realm. He could also feel the breathing of this world at all times. He could feel the operation of this world, the changes in this world. And what the 34 false sages felt at this time was the complete opposite of what Luo Fan felt. At this moment, they felt that there seemed to be some kind of inexplicable barrier between them and this world. This barrier blocked their connection with the great Tao of this world. The sense of security that they originally felt because of the World Guardian had been reduced to an unimaginable level at this time. In a daze, it made them recall how they felt when they faced false sages before they became sages. Upon realizing this, the 34 pseudo-sages revealed a hint of fear on their faces. After a while, a false sage who looked like an old man who had been speaking all this while said, "Fellow Taoist, now that you're also a false sage of this world, do you still want to help another world destroy this world?" Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned. That did make sense before this. His body of flesh and blood was only a single world false sage. The ancient demon realm had nothing to do with him, so there was naturally no problem for him to help the human realm invade the ancient demon realm. It was only natural for him to destroy the entire world. However, he had already become a double-world false sage. In the ancient demon realm, he already had the status of a false sage. This way, although there were still some differences between the ancient demon realm and the human realm, it was already different from before. At this time, it was obviously a little inappropriate to continue helping the cultivators of the human realm invade this world and destroy it. After thinking for a while, he said, "You're convinced." Hearing this, the 34 false sages were pleasantly surprised, but none of them expected Luo Fan to say such nice things. They all said, "Fellow Taoist, you're wise and righteous. We admire you." After that, a false sage said, "Since you've already admitted your identity as a sage of this world, why don't we attack together and expel the cultivators of the human realm? We'll return this world to its rightful state." When Luo Fan heard this, he raised his eyes and glanced at him indifferently. In an instant, the false sage felt that his connection with the great Tao and the world had suddenly become further apart. After realizing this, how could he not understand that Luo Fan was dissatisfied with his words? He hurriedly shut his mouth. "To be honest, although I admit that I'm the fake saint of this world, although I admit that I'm a false sage of this world, my relationship with another world, which is the human realm, is much closer than my relationship with this world. Therefore, it's impossible for me to help this world expel the cultivators of the human realm," Luo Fan said indifferently. These words caused the expressions of the false sages to change slightly, but they could still understand. If Luo Fan really turned against them immediately, they would instead suspect how Luo Fan had cultivated to this level and how he had surpassed them. Luo Fan didn't care about their expressions and continued, "According to my duty to the human realm, protecting these cultivators is also my task. Therefore, not only will I not help this world expel the cultivators of the human realm. Moreover, I have the responsibility to stop you from dealing with these cultivators of the human realm." Hearing this, the expressions of the false sages finally changed. "Fellow Taoist, what do you mean? Could it be that only the cultivators of the human realm are allowed to invade this world, but this world can't resist?" Speaking of this, all the 34 false sages emitted an awe-inspiring aura. Under this aura, the entire world trembled slightly. In fact, even the great Tao was rolling slightly at this moment. Their connection with the great Tao seemed to have become closer again. Chapter 1641. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the 34 false sages looked helpless. Although this situation was much better than completely restricting the people of this world and allowing the cultivators of the human realm to occupy this world, they were still in an absolutely disadvantageous position. One must know that Luo Fan had already laid the most solid foundation for the mortal world. As long as the fire of the mortal world was not extinguished, the cultivators of the mortal world would naturally be able to gain a foothold in the demon world. In that case, no matter how the war developed, the ancient demon world would be the one to suffer in the end. It would only be them. However, it was obvious that they had no other way to refute Luo Fan at this time, nor could they change his decision. Strength determined everything. Therefore, at this time, they could only sigh and nod. Since you have decided, we will naturally follow your decision. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "That's good." As he said that, he moved his heart and his figure became extremely ordinary. The light that was constantly emitting from his body, because of his nature, was also completely extinguished at the same time. Now, he looked like the most ordinary mortal. After transforming into this appearance, Luo Fan moved his heart and took a step forward. His figure had already disappeared from the fire of this world and the fire of the demon world, completely disappearing from the sight of the 34 false sages. Seeing this, how could the 34 false sages not understand why Luo Fan did not want them to do exactly what he was doing? They did not waste too much energy to deduce it. They each passed down a sacred edict and asked the many living beings in the ancient demon world to think of ways to chase away the invaders. Then, they disappeared into the void and returned to their own cave abode. At this moment, all the living beings in the ancient demon world felt incredulous. In a trance, they felt that something seemed to have changed in this world. An indescribable sense of loss arose spontaneously. Originally, their world had always been invading other worlds. He had been working hard to conquer the other worlds, but now, in just one night, they had suddenly become the one being invaded, the one being conquered. This sudden change really made them feel a little unbalanced. All of a sudden, all sorts of angry roars came from all over the world. As he roared angrily, resentment began to build up within him. This resentment was directed at the human world and the 34 false saints. To all living beings, these 34 false saints had stood high above all living beings for so many years. In the end, when the world needed them the most, they were completely useless. In the end, they could only send out such a useless holy decree. How could they accept this? However, resentment was meaningless to a false saint. At this moment, the false sages who sensed the resentment. With just a wave of his hand, the resentment that was rushing towards them turned into nothingness. It couldn't affect them at all, let alone hurt them. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that they had promised Luo Fan not to make a move, they might have even changed the direction of the resentment. They would have directed the resentment towards the cultivators of the human world, adding strength to the many living beings that were blocking the cultivators of the human world. When Luo Fan disappeared, after entering this world, the many cultivators of the human world within the range of the fire of the human world instantly heard Luo Fan's words. Those words told them that there would definitely be no false saints in this world to deal with them. Their opponents were just living beings who had yet to become false saints. As long as they could defeat these living beings, no matter what they obtained in this world in the end, no matter how much space or area they occupied, no false saints would make a move. Knowing this, the sect master of the Myriad Flower sect and the others were overjoyed. Originally, although they had attacked this world with the help of the fire of the human world, they were still extremely uneasy and were constantly prepared to return to the human world. After all, they couldn't be more clear about the existence of false saints in this world. Although they were killing in all directions at this moment, causing the living beings of the ancient demon world to retreat, preventing them from taking even half a step into the fire of the human world, they were still weak after all. However, they were weak after all. If this false saint were to make a move, all of them would only be a matter of a finger from the other party. Under such circumstances, how could they possibly settle down? However, now that they had heard Luo Fan's words, they instantly felt emboldened. The person who spoke was a false saint. They didn't doubt this at all. Since the false saint said that the other party's false saint would not make a move, the possibility of it being a lie was extremely small. Since that was the case, with the help of the fire of the human world, why would they still need to care about the threat of the living beings on the other side? After thinking through all of this, the many cultivators began to split up and modify the space-time within tens of thousands of miles around the entrance. Fortresses, space-time, cave abodes, and array formations gradually filled the space-time within this range. This originally empty space-time, that only had the fire of the human world, had unknowingly turned into a base that allowed the many cultivators to obtain supplies, rest, and continuously nurture their strength. In just a few months, all of these changes were completed. When the base was completed, there were more and more cultivators passing through the passageway between the human realm and the primordial demon realm. They entered this world and became the vanguard of their invasion, causing the originally extremely large base to gradually become lively from its desolate state. These cultivators were obviously cultivators sent by the many sects in the human world who had received the news. This was also because the development of the war in the ancient demon world was becoming more and more advantageous to the human world. If that wasn't the case, it was because it was extremely difficult for them to advance here, and they couldn't even gain a foothold at all. However, there definitely wouldn't be so many sects sending cultivators into this world. After all, if they couldn't gain a foothold, then they would only be courting death by entering this world. They wouldn't be able to obtain many benefits at all, but if they could gain a foothold, the situation would be different. Once they gained a foothold, they would have a stable foundation that could continuously extract resources from this world. Then, they would be able to continuously import the benefits of this world into the human world, allowing their sects to continue to grow, not to mention anything else. Just comprehending the profound principles of this world that were completely different from the human world was already a great opportunity for many cultivators who couldn't break through their bottleneck. It was enough for them to scramble like ducks. As more and more cultivators entered the human world, the fire of the human world seemed to have obtained more resources and fuel, becoming more and more vigorous. As time passed, it began to become brighter and brighter, and the area it occupied also became wider and wider. Although the fire of the demon world was in its home field, and although more and more demon world creatures came to attack the cultivators of the human world, in the end, because the strength of the person who created these flames was not as strong as Luofan, they were constantly retreating. In just a few months they had already retreated nearly half the distance. This kind of development made the cultivators of the human world inexplicably happy. It was as if they could directly see the result of completely conquering this world and completely seizing all the resources in this world. While the invasion and anti-invasion war between the human world and the demon world was in full swing, Luofan had already turned into an ordinary creature of the demon world. He was very relaxed in this demon world, and very casually wandered around. Although it was already invaded by the human world, this world was so vast. Even if the news spread at the fastest speed, it would still take decades for the whole world to know about this. In this way, for those places that were relatively far from the invaded place, the invasion naturally seemed to happen in another world, and it was difficult to attract the attention of the creatures there. Therefore, even though it was already invaded, when the distance was as far as where Luofan was now, everything seemed to be the same as before. Then, the living beings in there would still do what they were supposed to do. They would still fight, talk about marriage, fight for family property, and enjoy life. The creatures in the primordial demon world were very different from the creatures in the human world. Their appearances were very strange. There were also real humanoid creatures, but they were an extremely rare race. Under such circumstances, Luofan, who was still in human form, walked in the primordial demon world, but he would occasionally attract all kinds of disdainful gazes. Occasionally, there would even be creatures who couldn't stand the sight of him and wanted to come up to find trouble with him and humiliate him. These experiences were all new to Luofan, but they made him feel very interested. Occasionally trying to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger made him feel quite good. Luo Fan's body was now a double-world false saint, but he still didn't understand the world in front of him very well. The various comprehensions and authority he had obtained about this world were only naturally obtained because of the breakthrough of his own cultivation realm. Compared to the comprehension and authority he had gained through his own cultivation bit by bit, there was clearly still a gap between such strength. Without achieving perfection, it was obviously impossible to comprehend more of the essence from it. So, for him, what he needed to do now was to comprehend the profundities of this world, comprehend the Tao of this world, and extract the profundities that he needed to supplement his Tao of cultivation with his physical body. As Luo Fan walked more and more places in this world, and as his experiences became richer, the aura that belonged to this world emitted from Luo Fan's body became stronger and stronger. The various comprehensions that belonged to this world also became more and more numerous. The various mysteries that were originally forcefully gathered together truly fused with his body. In the end, on a certain day 3 years later, Luo Fan, who was standing on a certain cliff, had a thought. He felt an inexplicable light emitting from the life essence of his body. This light was so mysterious that it vaguely gave off a feeling that it was indestructible and eternal. When he sensed this light, Luo Fan instantly understood. This was the essence of innate indestructibility. Clearly, through these 3 years of comprehension and sensing, he had truly become a false saint of this world and obtained the innate indestructibility of this world. From then on, in this world, he was no longer any different from the false saints who were born and raised in this world. Realizing this, Luo Fan let out a long breath. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face. The cliff he was standing on was millions of feet above the ground. Looking into the distance, it was a boundless sea of clouds. In this sea of clouds, it was extremely far away. Mountain peaks broke through the sea of clouds one after another, revealing a small portion of the mountain. It looked as if islands had appeared in the boundless sea of clouds. Occasionally, heavenly winds would sweep past and the sea of clouds would surge, showing a scene of ethereal immortals. Just as Luo Fan was sighing inwardly, the void behind him slightly distorted, and a person's silhouette materialized out of thin air. As a mountain god, you dare to appear in front of me. You're really bold, Luo Fan said calmly. The figure that appeared behind him looked like an old demon. Although his body was majestic, he had a hunched back and was holding a walking stick in his hand. However, his back was hunched and he held a walking stick in his hand. After he appeared, he didn't say anything and started coughing non-stop. After a while, he bowed and said, "Greetings, great immortal. This time, I'm bold enough to appear before you, great immortal. I have something to ask of you." As he spoke, the old man looked extremely nervous, as if he was worried that Luo Fan would crush him to death if he was in a bad mood. Luo Fan said calmly, "What is it that makes you dare to risk your life to appear behind me? This great immortal is just standing here, but the pressure emanating from your body has already killed almost all the living beings on this mountain. I hope that great immortal will be magnanimous and let this mountain go." The old man gritted his teeth and threw his walking stick to the side. He knelt down in front of Luo Fan and kowtowed to the ground. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned. Because he was here, the pressure was generated, and almost all the living creatures on this mountain were killed. He instinctively did not want to believe such a thing. He was confident that he did not leak any aura here, but it seemed impossible for him to affect anything in the outside world. How could he kill living beings? "Are you talking nonsense?" Luo Fan said calmly. "I wouldn't dare," the old man said while shivering. Although Luo Fan did not reveal any aura, just his presence alone was enough to make the mountain god unable to bear it. "Since you wouldn't dare, I will hide everything. How could I oppress living beings?" Luo Fan said calmly. "Great immortal, you may not know this, but this mountain has existed since the birth of the world. In this mountain, there is a strand of vitality from the birth of the world. In this mountain, countless living beings are born from this strand of vitality. Although the great deity doesn't emit any aura, just the great deity's existence is enough to suppress this energy and cause it to lose balance. That's why almost all the living beings in the mountain are dead. The mountain god said loudly. His voice was filled with fear, and it was even trembling slightly. However, he still said everything in the end. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned. This was something he had never thought about. He had originally chosen this mountain peak because he saw that this mountain peak had an extremely high cliff that he was currently standing on. Standing here, the scenery would be completely different from other places. However, he did not notice that this mountain was special. With a thought, his perception instantly swept across the mountain. In an instant, all the secrets of this mountain appeared in his mind. When he understood all this, he knew that the mountain god was not talking nonsense. The material of this mountain had indeed experienced an extremely long time. Compared to its surroundings, and even anything that Luo Fan had seen in other places in this world, it had experienced a much longer time. And in the center of this mountain, there was an extremely thin crack that stretched from the foot of the mountain to the top. In this tiny crack that could even be ignored, there was a small strand of vitality. This strand of vitality was so insignificant that it even felt like a mortal could blow it away. This strand of vitality was so insignificant that it even felt like a mortal could blow it away. However, this strand of vitality was so powerful. The power contained within it was enough to shake the foundation of this world. It felt like any vibration from this origin energy could be transmitted to any location in this world and cause a vibration that was millions and millions of times stronger than this vibration. Such a strand of vitality appeared here. Its presence had already deeply seeped into the entire mountain that was millions of feet tall. As a result, everything on the mountain was connected to it, whether it was every rock, every blade of grass, or any creature that was born on the mountain. It was like this, at this moment, this strand of vitality seemed to have received some kind of indescribable pressure and was continuously shrinking. Its length, which originally stretched from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain, began to slowly shorten. In the short period of time that Luo Fan looked at it, it had already shrunk by several feet. And as this strand of vitality continued to shrink, the entire mountain also underwent an indescribable change. It was as if something in the mountain was constantly being sucked out. It was constantly being sucked into the vitality. Because of this, it was as if the life force of the many living beings on the mountain had been sucked away. They began to die in large sways. Luo Fan swept his gaze over and discovered that of the hundreds of millions of living creatures that originally existed on this mountain, there were now less than 1 million left. So it's really like this. Luo Fan's heart jolted. He lifted his hand and pointed. In an instant, that strand of vitality was suddenly extracted. Of course, because of his technique, this vitality was in the process of being extracted. Its connection with this mountain and all the living creatures on this mountain didn't change at all. It was still the same as before. As a result, even though the change in the extraction of the origin chi was many times greater than the change in the withering of the origin chi, it did not lead to the deaths of any living beings, nor did it cause any other changes to the mountain. When this strand of vitality fell into his hand, Luo Fan suddenly had an indescribable feeling, as if he had grasped the pulse of some existence. The endless ancient aura that emanated from the origin chi was so obvious and so strong. Faintly, there were also countless memory fragments that entered his heart. These memory fragments told of how a world was born from nothing. They also told of how a wisp of vitality was sealed by an ancient mountain under various coincidences in this world, and how it was preserved in the end. They watched the vicissitudes of the world, watched countless living beings grow old and die, and finally preserved in the present after an unknown number of trillions of years, feeling these memory fragments, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with a trace of enlightenment. In his heart, he had already understood what these memories were. These memory fragments were clearly imprinted by this strand of vitality. They were the memories of this world. There was an extremely large amount of memory. Looking at these memories, Luo Fan seemed to have experienced the entire evolution of this world. Although it was only for a short while, his perception of this world was already completely different. There's actually such an unexpected gain. Looking at the vitality that had turned into a ball in his hand that looked like a thumb-sized pearl, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel emotional. Such a strand of vitality was naturally not very beneficial to his true cultivation realm. However, it was extremely beneficial for him to understand the essence of this world and the mysteries of this connate indestructible spiritual light. Just like at this moment, it allowed him to grasp the pulse of this world, allowing him to obtain the first portion of this world's providence. A portion of providence was the providence of a false saint. Obtaining the first portion of providence that belonged to this world meant that this world had truly acknowledged his identity as a false saint of this world. From then on, he could also obtain everything that a false saint in this world could obtain, whether it was power, authority, or comprehension. Chapter 1642. Apart from this, Luo Fan suddenly understood the method to break through from the double-world false sage to the triple-world false sage. Or rather, it was a cultivation technique that was indescribably huge in the multiple-world false sage realm. This technique was to obtain the providence bestowed by the various worlds. With this providence, he would continuously promote his cultivation technique, causing the cultivation realm of his physical body to continuously increase. After understanding this, he suddenly had a feeling that it was so simple. It made sense. His cultivation technique was able to break through the limitations of the single-world false sage realm and reach the multiple-world false sage realm because of the large amount of providence given to him by that world. Since that was the case, the cultivation of the multiple-world false sage realm and the cultivation of the single-world false sage realm were of the same origin. The cultivation technique should naturally be related to providence. It was obvious that obtaining more providence would be able to promote the advancement of his cultivation realm. After thinking through this, Luo Fan smiled slightly. He raised his hand and pinched it gently. The wisp of primordial energy in his hand suddenly trembled and exploded. At this moment, the mountain peak and all the living beings on it instantly felt their bodies relax, as if they had suddenly gotten rid of some inexplicable shackles. An indescribable feeling of lightness surged into their hearts. Even the mountain god that appeared in front of Luo Fan at this moment suddenly revealed a look of disbelief. As the mountain god of this mountain peak, the connection between the mountain god and this wisp of primordial energy was closer than that of any other living being. Such a close connection. This caused the mountain god to be affected by this primordial energy more than any other living being, even more so than this mountain peak itself. If it wasn't for the fact that he was strong enough and his endurance was many times stronger than other living beings, how could it be the other living beings' turn to die first? He would be the first to die. However, at this moment, he felt that the invisible shackles that were vaguely controlling his life and preventing him from leaving this mountain peak had suddenly disappeared. Although this way, his control over this mountain peak seemed to have weakened a little. However, compared to the shackles being removed. However, this little bit of disadvantage was already so negligible. Thank you, great immortal. The mountain god quickly discovered the source of this change. He immediately prostrated himself before Luo Fan and kowtowed, almost causing the entire mountain to shake violently. Luo Fan said faintly, "It's just a matter of convenience. You're dismissed. Don't disturb me again." Hearing this, the mountain god could not help but agree. With a flash, he merged into the mountain below and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. No matter how many things he wanted to say or how much gratitude he wanted to express, after Luo Fan spoke, he could only suppress all of it. Seeing the mountain god leave, Luo Fan lowered his head and looked at the invisible existence in his fingers. This was an invisible existence. It was the fragments of memories that had been branded in the Yuan Qi over the countless years of the world. In other words, the memories that belonged to this world. This bit of memory. This was the key to this wisp of Yuan Qi. Other than this memory, everything else could be created by Luo Fan with a thought. Even if that wisp of Yuan Qi was born when the world was created and contained the chaotic Yuan Qi that appeared in the innate indestructible spiritual light before the world was born. It was the same. This bit of memory fragment was quite useful to Luo Fan. However, it was quite useful. However, he could think of a way to integrate it into his own cultivation method. Through this integration, he could make his cultivation method more and more suitable for this world, and it would also allow this cultivation method to go further in the double world false saint level. If this was combined with what he had comprehended previously, obtaining the luck of this world to strengthen his cultivation realm, it would be able to greatly reduce his cultivation process in this world. This was clearly a great thing for him. With a thought, Luo Fan's eyes flickered with infinite wisdom. Not long after, an inexplicable suction force appeared in his body and began to frantically absorb the memory fragment in his hand. This memory fragment was an invisible existence and did not even have any power. How could it resist this suction force? In the blink of an eye, this memory fragment was sucked into his body by this suction force. Immediately after, a terrifying sound that sounded like the creation of the world came from his body. This sound directly shook the surrounding void, causing the space-time within an unknown radius of billions of miles to shake continuously as if it was placed in a jar, producing an unimaginably huge change. In this change, endless light and shadows were born out of thin air. These light and shadows were extremely strange. It was as if the entire process from the birth of this world was replayed, causing the countless living beings within this range to be incomparably fascinated. As the light and shadows continued to develop, more and more living beings comprehended all sorts of wondrous techniques and indescribable abilities. In fact, many living beings even gained intelligence from nothing, breaking away from muddle-headed beasts and stepping into the realm of cultivators, or rather, monsters. These changes lasted for several months. After a few months, when everything calmed down, Luo Fan already looked quite different from before. Still just a portion of luck? Luo Fan opened his eyes and sensed slightly, but he could not help but feel somewhat disappointed. Just now, he had fused the memory fragments into his body's cultivation method, thus triggering a natural reaction from the world and causing his cultivation method to change. This caused the space-time within a radius of billions of miles to form an extremely mysterious domain, allowing countless living beings to obtain tremendous benefits from it. Indirectly, it created enlightenment merit. Normally, such an action should have resulted in a tremendous amount of luck, however. The development of the matter had clearly disappointed him. He had indeed obtained some luck in the process, but it was only a portion. Compared to the 1,500 portions of luck that he had obtained when he obtained the cave abode of the world companion lifeform in the human world, it was as slow as a snail. However, this thought only appeared in Luo Fan's mind for a moment. Very soon, he could not help but laugh. A portion of luck seemed extremely small, but one must not forget that this portion of luck was equivalent to the luck of a false saint. If an ordinary living being obtained such luck, it would even be enough to support them to become a false saint. Enlightening the living beings within a radius of billions of miles would allow them to obtain an opportunity to become a false saint. Was this not enough? It's not just troublesome to use other methods to obtain more luck. Moreover, it'll probably take a very long time. The best method is probably to obtain the remnants or accompanying items of the world companion lifeforms. As this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan made up his mind in the blink of an eye. It was not an easy task to obtain the accompanying items of this world. If it was an ordinary false sage, they might not even know that such a thing existed. However, it was not difficult for Luo Fan. He had created so many worlds and walked through so many more worlds than this, but his understanding of the things that accompanied the worlds were few. It was not difficult for him to find the companion objects of this world. In particular, at this moment, he possessed the memory fragments of this world that were imprinted in the wisp of vitality. This made it even more difficult for him to find the companion item. Thinking, he slowly closed his eyes and began to use his own method to carefully deduce what the companion was and where it was. While Luo Fan was in this world, he was experiencing the mysteries of the world. While he was searching for a way to improve his physical body's cultivation realm, in his original world, the human world, the broken emperor had already come out of seclusion. In other words, he had left the starry sky world that he had created. He appeared directly outside that world. In the past few years, he had already passed his cultivation. He had forcefully cultivated the cultivation realm of his physical body to a level that was close to becoming a false saint. But now, he had reached a bottleneck. Even though he had already passed the false saint realm and all the mysteries within were no longer secrets to him, it was still an extremely difficult thing for his physical body to break through to this realm. He had been stuck in this realm for several months. This was unprecedented for him, who had been constantly improving and improving like a hot knife through butter in the past few years. It also let him know that he was still lacking a bit of opportunity if he wanted to break through and become a false sage with his body of flesh and blood. Or rather, he had done something lacking. Why is it so difficult to become a false sage? The broken emperor thought to himself as he walked unhurriedly in the air toward the direction that made him feel a little touched. Now, he had already obtained a lot of benefits from this cultivation method. A small part of the innate indestructible essence that was fused with the origin of life had already been transferred to his physical body. This effect could be said to be quite significant. In fact, it was precisely because the effect was quite significant that the broken emperor was so anxious to break through at this time. If the effect wasn't obvious, he would be even more patient. Just as the broken emperor was walking between heaven and earth, the 18 false saints in the 18 heavens above the void focused their attention on the passage that had suddenly appeared underground between the ancient demon realm and the human realm. The appearance of that passage was a completely unexpected change for these false saints. When they first sensed the appearance of this passage, the 18 false saints were inexplicably panicked. They felt that their luck was already extremely bad. They were different from ordinary people in this world. They had an extremely deep understanding of the ancient demon realm. The fact that there were 34 false saints in the ancient demon realm was no secret to them at all. In this way, if the ancient demon realm invaded the human realm, the 18 false saints had just been resurrected from the dead and had yet to fully recover to their peak state. Their chances of winning would definitely be unimaginably low. However, the development of the matter was unimaginable to them. After the passage was opened, the ancient demon realm actually retreated step by step. In the end, it even allowed the cultivators of the human realm to gain a foothold in the ancient demon realm, building a perfect fortress and a perfect base. Such a change caused them to be indescribably shocked. However, they were false saints after all. They quickly associated this with Luo Fan, and their mood couldn't help but become extremely complicated. The situation between the human realm and the ancient demon realm was naturally an extremely good thing for the human realm. However, the source of such a good change was actually not them, but the existence that was neither friend nor foe to them and completely treated them like ants. This made them not know how to deal with it for a moment. In the end, after a fierce debate, they could only decide to stay put as if nothing had happened. They allowed the lower-level cultivators to do whatever they wanted. They did not help those cultivators invade the ancient demon realm, nor did they stop those cultivators from entering the ancient demon realm to carry out the invasion, This choice was surprisingly the same as Luo Fan's request for the 34 false saints in the ancient demon realm. This caused the entire situation to fall into a stable stalemate and not become more intense because of this. An even more terrifying war, at this moment, the broken emperor vaguely felt that the location that touched him. It came from the passage between the ancient demon realm and the human realm. Although the broken emperor didn't use all of his abilities and techniques, and only relied on the abilities and techniques of his fleshly body was still at the level of a supreme venerable. For such an existence, the world was extremely small. It was crossing the entire world. To him, the entire world was a process that could be completed in just a few days. Furthermore, the distance between where he was and the underground was much closer than if he were to travel across the entire world. Therefore, in less than 15 minutes, the broken emperor had already followed his senses and arrived at the entrance of the underground passage between the ancient demon realm and the human realm. Compared to before, the underground space around this entrance had undergone earth-shattering changes. Back then, because this place was the deepest underground, there was no light, and the space was oppressive, stifling, and empty. There were no signs of life or living creatures. But now, because of the existence of this passage, and because more and more cultivators were pouring in from all over the world, this underground space had already been opened up into a vast and boundless spacetime. There were even cultivators who had created the sun, moon, and stars here, forming an extremely complete and even perfect starry sky operation system. On the ground of this vast and boundless spacetime, there were densely packed cities, cave residences, and various camps. The land that was originally barren and lifeless had already been breached by countless strange beasts and living creatures, and countless medicinal fields had been opened up. If one did not know what this place looked like in the past, one might have thought that this place was the land where the cultivation civilization was extremely prosperous. At this moment, at the entrance of the passage, there were already layers of restrictions, defenses, and checkpoints. Almost at every moment, there were tens of thousands of powerful cultivators guarding this place, guarding against any existence that wanted to pass through this passage from any direction. At the same time, there were all kinds of strange creatures entering or exiting the passageway after layers of check. The broken emperor floated in the void, looking down at this passage. With a slight movement of his heart, countless information flowed into his heart from the surrounding void. In the blink of an eye, he already understood what was going on. It's actually that fellow Taoist who opened up this passage. Could it be that the opportunity for me to become a false saint with this body is in the so-called ancient demon realm? He thought to himself. He was a supreme emperor, and even his flesh and blood body was that of a supreme venerable. Under such circumstances, even if a false saint wanted to find him, it would depend on whether he was willing or not, let alone those creatures here. Even though there were countless detection arrays and magical treasures here, he was still suspended high in the air, but no one or anything could discover his existence. The broken emperor was very decisive. Since he felt that his opportunity was in the ancient demon realm, he naturally wouldn't hesitate at this time. With a thought, his figure appeared. The moment his figure appeared, countless arrays and magical treasures were agitated. All kinds of inexplicable fluctuations began to gather towards the broken emperor from all directions. Immediately afterward, a female cultivator flew up from below and directly arrived in front of the broken emperor. This cultivator was a pseudo-sage. Although he was not a level 9 pseudo-sage or a supreme venerable, he was almost the most powerful being here. This woman arrived in front of the broken emperor. He bowed and said, "I'm on duty today. May I know why you have come here?" He was visiting a friend. Or are you planning to go to the ancient devil world? Hearing this, the broken emperor smiled and said, "I want to go to the demon realm. What procedures do I have to go through?" The woman's eyes lit up. He said, "Fellow Taoist is willing to contribute to the human world. This is a blessing for the human world, and I'm very impressed. However, in order to carry out the necessary precautions, I need you to leave your mark behind. I hope you can forgive me. By leaving an imprint, he would be able to carry out a rough surveillance. Although it wasn't much and was greatly affected by their cultivation realm, it was enough for them to roughly sense the approximate location of the Shadow Emperor. If an ordinary cultivator were to hear this, of course he had to think about it carefully. After all, he was being monitored. This was not something that anyone could easily accept. In fact, it was precisely because of this rule that a large portion of cultivators would rather not enter the ancient demon realm through the passageway. Instead, they would rather stay in this spacetime and use another method to achieve their original goal. However, for existences like the Broken Emperor, it was nothing. It didn't matter at all. With the nature of the Shadow Emperor, it was not only easy for him to forge something that seemed to be related to him at first glance. However, there wasn't much of a connection imprinted within. Moreover, even if he left a mark, he could easily block the connection between the mark and himself, making it impossible for any existence to monitor him. Hence, he agreed without any hesitation at this moment. Hearing that the Broken Emperor didn't even need to think before agreeing, the woman was even more delighted. She said, "Fellow Taoist is wise and righteous, I'm very grateful. I hope that fellow Taoist can come with me." The Broken Emperor nodded. Together with the woman, they passed through the layers of arrays around the passage and arrived at a building in the middle of the array. This building was extremely mysterious. It was a hub of the array and controlled part of the function of the array. After arriving here, the woman brought the Broken Emperor to a stone wall. On this stone wall, there were hundreds of thousands of names carved densely. These names were all flashing with different light. These lights were extremely mysterious. When the Broken Emperor saw these lights, he could already sense that they contained an extremely large amount of information. The information was vague, and it seemed that a special way to interpret it was needed to understand its true content. "Fellow Taoist, please," the woman said. Seeing this, the Broken Emperor smiled slightly. Without hesitation, he pressed his hand, and a mark blasted into the stone wall. It formed the word broken, which began to flash with a light similar to the other names. Seeing this word appear on the wall, the woman heaved a sigh of relief. She showed a grateful expression and said, "No one has ever been as calm as fellow Taoist." The Broken Emperor smiled faintly and said, "Can I pass through the passage now?" Of course. When the woman saw that the Broken Emperor didn't have any intention to speak, a trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes. After that, she brought the Broken Emperor through the layers of defensive arrays. After a few thousand turns and even encountering dozens of patrolling cultivators, they finally arrived at a deep cave. This cave was the entrance to the ancient demon world. After arriving here, the Broken Emperor and the woman nodded, then turned around and entered the cave. Seeing the Broken Emperor leave, the woman sighed. It would be good if there were more of such existences. Then our work wouldn't be so difficult. While speaking, a thought flashed in her mind, however, he is really strong. Being so strong, he should have an illustrious reputation. Why have I never heard of the existence of such a fellow Taoist before? Previously, in order to let the Broken Emperor leave his mark on the stone wall, she was extremely nervous and didn't think too much about it. Now that the matter had passed, she finally reacted and began to feel doubtful about this obviously illogical fact. Chapter 1643. As soon as the Broken Emperor stepped into the ancient demon world, he was suddenly enveloped by the human world fire that Luo Fan had set up back then. The characteristic of the human world fire that could expel all power that did not belong to the human world began to produce an unimaginable effect, causing his body of flesh and blood to be continuously refined and enhanced in the flames. There seems to be the aura of that fellow Taoist. In an instant, the Broken Emperor sensed a situation that even ordinary false sages could not sense. Compared to the entrance of the human world, The exit of this passage in the ancient demon world had also undergone earth-shattering changes. Of course, due to the different functions, the surrounding scenery at the exit was completely different from the entrance. At the entrance, there were all kinds of logistical equipment, such as organizations that provided herbs, ammunition, magic tools, and weapons. And here, at the exit, it was already considered the front line of the battle. What appeared here were of course all kinds of battle equipment, such as formations, tents, large weapons, and large devices. And the many cultivators here were all in a hurry, all of them extremely nervous. Although this kind of human world fire had an extremely powerful body-refining effect on the living beings in the human world. However, this was not an endless cycle. In fact, generally, only those who had just entered for a period of time could achieve such a tempering effect. If one stayed in this flame for a slightly longer time, the body-refining effect of the flame would naturally become insignificant. Just like now. The many cultivators in this flame already seemed to be moving around in other normal areas, and they were no longer affected by the flames of this world. Their bodies would not be tempered because of this, nor would they be attacked by too much heat from the flames. Of course, this was also because the cultivators here were extremely powerful, and the temperature of this kind of flame was actually nothing to them. The broken emperor himself had no interest in participating in the war between the human world and the ancient demon world. In fact, he only came here to find an opportunity that could allow his body of flesh and blood to break through and step into the false sage realm. And this kind of opportunity, even if he didn't have any concept of it, he knew. It couldn't be in the ancient demon world. Since he wasn't in the ancient demon world and he was here, it was obvious where the opportunity was. It was obvious that he was in this battle. Before he stepped into the ancient demon world, he had already guessed it. It was also because of this conjecture that he followed the normal procedure to enter the ancient demon world instead of using his emperor's stage strength that surpassed false saints to easily bypass the senses of all the cultivators and enter this world easily. Since he had already followed the normal procedure, he naturally wouldn't fall short of success just to save some trouble. His body was tempered by the mortal world flame. Feeling that all kinds of changes had gradually subsided and his body became refreshed, the broken emperor directly came to the reception of this battlefield. He directly expressed his desire to participate in the battle to the cultivators. Everyone on the battlefield naturally welcomed such existences who came to participate in the battle. Because of this period of experience, he had a complete set of procedures. After going through this process, it was already a few days later. The broken emperor finally came to the front line of the battlefield and fought with the cultivators of the ancient demon world. It was as if a tight battle fortress had been set up in the mortal world flame. In the demon world flame, there were also similar buildings and similar mechanisms. Among them, there were also a large number of powerful creatures of the ancient demon world. For the people of the mortal world, although it was partly because they wanted to seize the resources of the ancient demon world, it was more to protect the mortal world and prevent it from being invaded by the ancient demon world. However, for the creatures of the ancient demon world, the cultivators of the mortal world were completely unjust invaders. Under such circumstances, their attitude towards this war could be imagined. This caused the war to become extremely tragic. Almost every battle was fought to the death. Because of this, ever since the cultivators of the ancient demon world built a perfect line of defense, the boundary between the mortal world flame and the demon world flame had not moved at all for several months. Every time there was a sign that the balance was about to be broken, both sides would push it back regardless of their lives. In such a state, there were already hundreds of thousands of cultivators and creatures left on this battlefield. Moreover, the battlefield had been smashed and rebuilt more than 1,000 times due to the intense battle. When the broken emperor participated in such a battle, he quickly immersed himself in it. He did not forget his fundamental purpose of participating in this battle, so he completely relied on his flesh and blood body, which was only a supreme venerable. He did not use his real strength at all. Such battles made it extremely difficult for him to win every single one of them. Of course, every victory and every defeat also brought an extremely shocking stimulation to his soul, causing the cultivation method of the mortal world that he had comprehended in the past that was completely suitable for him to undergo more and more changes. It faintly made his flesh and blood body feel the hope of continuing to improve, allowing his flesh and blood body to faintly see the existence of the false saint realm hidden behind it. As the number of battles increased, what he felt and saw became more and more clear. This change made him feel more and more certain that his choice was the right one. He felt that he had really come here to find the opportunity for his flesh and blood body to break through to the next realm. Time passed by slowly. After an unknown period of time, on a certain day, the broken emperor suddenly woke up from his immersion. It was not that he had broken the barrier and allowed his flesh and blood body to become a false saint. Instead, a completely new change that he had never thought of appeared out of thin air. It swept through all the worlds and also the place where he was. "What's going on?" His heart skipped a beat. He frowned and looked up. His eyes seemed to pierce through countless space-time. Separated by countless worlds, he was able to see a certain location outside of that world. Over there, a cultivator with the appearance of a boy hovered quietly in the air. From his body, a mysterious and bizarre force surged out, sweeping across the billions of worlds in this cluster of worlds. It was also because of this inexplicable stirring that the broken emperor recovered from his obsession with war. This was also the reason why the broken emperor was able to achieve his goal. This is Child Emperor from the looks of it. It has been completely refined by this innate inextinguishable spiritual light. The broken emperor sighed inwardly and thought so. Although he wasn't completely refined by this innate inextinguishable spiritual light, he was still an existence that was only one step away from that tragic end. He had done a lot of research on what would happen after being refined. At this moment, when he saw that figure, he immediately recognized what was going on. The force that surged out from his body was none other than this innate inextinguishable spiritual light. In other words, this boundless cluster of worlds in front of him was communicating with him in an indescribable manner. Or rather, it was undergoing some kind of extremely mysterious brainwashing. In this brainwashing process, the world's will of this innate inextinguishable spiritual light would gradually replace Child Emperor's will, causing this body of Child Emperor to gradually separate from his original body. Moreover, it might even reverse the direction and transmit the will back. In the end, it might affect his original body, causing the will of his original body to change inexplicably. Seems like he's getting impatient. At this moment, in this ancient demon world, Luo Fan, who was walking somewhere, also raised his head and looked at the Child Emperor who appeared among the many worlds. This was the thought that flashed through his mind. At this moment, Child Emperor clearly had a conflicted expression on his face. Moreover, looking at the changes within his body, there was a will that was breaking through space through some kind of extremely mysterious connection. It was continuously entering this body, trying to make this body return to normal. This will that was transmitted through some kind of extremely mysterious connection was exactly the same as the will that Child Emperor originally possessed. Clearly, it was the will that was transmitted from Child Emperor's original body. The reason why such a will would appear was not difficult to imagine. It was definitely because Child Emperor's original body had sensed the changes in his clone and was unwilling to let his clone leave his control. Thus, he naturally tried his best to seize his clone back. However, it was a pity that his opponent was this innate inextinguishable spiritual light. Furthermore, it was the mysterious will that this innate inextinguishable spiritual light possessed, similar to the world's will. When his will wanted to seize his clone back, the world's will was also trying its best to seize his clone back. Thus, at this moment, it could be said that Child Emperor's own will was directly confronting the world's will. The result of this confrontation was self-evident. Although Child Emperor was an extremely powerful emperor, and his own strength was enough to destroy countless worlds and spacetime, this did not represent the world or spacetime that was born within this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Under such circumstances, his own will was naturally extremely powerless against the will of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. At this moment, in this direct confrontation, his will was being pushed back step by step. It looked like it was about to be completely infected by the world's will, not only the will that belonged to Child Emperor, but also the will that was continuously being injected into this clone through that mysterious connection. At this moment, it was continuously being infected and transformed. When he realized this, Child Emperor finally let out a shrill roar. Immediately after, he made a prompt decision. While he was still able to control the power within his clone, he instantly detonated everything within his clone. Rumble, a shocking thunderclap instantly rang out. An extremely terrifying shock wave swept out from the center of the explosion in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it swept through the billions of worlds that were formed within this innate spiritual light. Even if it was just a clone of an emperor, the power of the self-detonation of an emperor, it was powerful enough to destroy the heavens and the earth. At this moment, when the explosion of the shock wave swept out in all directions, the entire innate, inextinguishable spiritual light suddenly expanded, like a long snake suddenly swallowing a giant ostrich egg. It felt as if it would explode in the next moment, and the entire innate, inextinguishable spiritual light would be completely shattered into pieces. At the same time, the countless worlds within the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light were like leaves that were thrown into a stormy sea. Then, the fluctuations started to surge violently. In an instant, it was unknown how many worlds underwent a drastic change because of this change. Countless living beings died, and countless spacetime were completely shattered because of this. This included the ancient demon realm that the Broken Emperor and Luo Fan were in at this moment. Naturally, this also included the human realm. Because of this change, the passageway between the human realm and the ancient demon realm was suddenly distorted by a strong force. From its original straight appearance, it turned into a series of twists and turns. Although the technology used to open this passageway was extremely advanced, so the passageway did not break because of this. This violent vibration changed the internal attributes of the passageway, causing countless small worlds and spacetime to suddenly appear in the passageway out of thin air. The birth of these small worlds and spacetime seemed to have suddenly increased the distance between the two worlds by thousands of times, making it more difficult to pass through this passageway. It suddenly increased by thousands of times. However, at this moment, obviously not many living beings would notice this change. Compared to this change, the change that spread throughout the entire world, which was like the land had been turned into a pancake that was constantly being stir-fried at a roadside stall, caught the attention of all living beings. What happened? Wisps of spiritual consciousness constantly shuttled back and forth in the void, echoing. An inexplicable sense of panic filled every corner of the world, including the false saint. Even the false saint could not remain calm. Fortunately, this change did not last for too long. The innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was not directly blown up by the self-destruction of an emperor's clone. After shaking for a short while, it easily recovered by relying on the characteristics of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As it recovered, the many worlds also stabilized. With the stability of the world, the turbulence of all the worlds naturally subsided. Of course, although the world was stable, the changes that had been caused before were obviously not so easy to recover. Because of this change, the structure of the billions of worlds had completely changed. In the void where Tong Huang was originally, Some of the worlds around him had already been swept away, revealing a huge, circular void. As for Tong Huang's clone, it had completely disappeared, as if it had never appeared in the first place. How tragic! A leisurely sigh suddenly sounded in this void. Immediately after, a figure appeared out of thin air in this void. This figure was none other than the Emperor who had fought with Tong Huang for the right to refine the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. Obviously, the Emperor had seen the changes here, and when he saw Tong Huang explode, he finally rushed over. Naturally, the Emperor could not have expected Tong Huang to end up like this. At this moment, he was secretly curious about what had happened to make Tong Huang self-destruct so recklessly. What happened just now? At the start, it seemed like he had already stepped into the final process of refining the innate inextinguishable spiritual light. Why did he suddenly self-destruct? The Emperor muttered with a frown. Now, it had been 10 years since he and Tong Huang stepped into this innate inextinguishable spiritual light. During this period of time, because of the agreement with Tong Huang, he did not enter any of the countless worlds. Instead, he only cultivated in the worlds that he had opened up in the void. Therefore, he did not know what exactly Tong Huang had been doing all these years. Just as he was carefully observing his surroundings and deducing the cause of everything that had just happened, suddenly, his expression changed. The aura on his body began to emit uncontrollably, and it started to gradually change the surroundings, causing the surroundings to form like a space-time. An unknown state that was not space-time. An inexplicable vigilance flashed in his eyes. What a pity! Just as he was on guard, he heard an extremely familiar voice. Tong Huang. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. He recognized this voice. It was clearly the voice of Tong Huang, who had clearly self-destructed and turned into nothingness just now. Could it be that he has already sent another clone here in such a short period of time? How is this possible? There is not even a quarter of an hour. Even a realm emperor cannot do this. Such thoughts flashed through the Emperor's mind. At this moment, along with the voice of Tong Huang, a childlike figure gradually materialized from the void and gradually appeared. At first glance, this figure seemed to be exactly the same as Tong Huang. Even the aura on his body seemed to be exactly the same. There was no change at all. However, based on the Emperor's understanding of Tong Huang, he could clearly feel that this figure in front of him was slightly different from Tong Huang. This difference was not in anything else, but in the eyes. Although Tong Huang was a realm emperor, compared to other realm emperors, he was more emotional. In other words, he almost never suppressed his own emotions. He never tried to hide them. He would be happy when he should be happy, angry when he should be angry, and cry when he should be crying. He would laugh when he should be laughing. Because of this, his eyes were filled with profound wisdom, fluctuating like the waves of the sea. However, at this moment, the eyes of this Tong Huang that appeared in front of him were filled with profound wisdom. Apart from this profound wisdom, there were no other emotions. It was as if all the waves that should have existed did not exist at all. This kind of expression was definitely not something that Tong Huang possessed. "Who are you?" the Emperor shouted coldly. He did not have much of a relationship with Tong Huang. Before he encountered this connate inextinguishable spiritual light, he only knew of the existence of such a powerful realm emperor. However, just because they did not have a deep friendship did not mean that he would be indifferent to the changes in front of him. If he had remained indifferent to this change that clearly did not conform to common sense, he would have already died countless billions of years ago. "I am Tong Huang." Tong Huang smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you not recognize me? You are not Tong Huang." The Emperor said calmly, "Who are you?" "I am indeed Tong Huang. It's just that I have an additional identity now. Perhaps this identity makes me different from the Tong Huang you knew before. However, I am me. This has not changed," Tong Huang said calmly. Even though the emperor was a realm emperor, he still found it difficult to understand. He frowned and asked, "What additional identity do you have?" "The World Guardian," Tong Huang said calmly. As he spoke, the endless inextinguishable essence of the boundless world quickly gathered towards him. In the blink of an eye, it had already fused with him, causing an incomparably dense inextinguishable aura to appear on his body. Under the illumination of this aura, Tong Huang, who was floating there, looked like a miniature connate inextinguishable spiritual light. Just by standing there, he gave off the feeling that he was eternal and indestructible, that he would not be worn down by thousands of tribulations, and that he was in an invincible position. "You have been refined by this connate inextinguishable spiritual light." The emperor's eyes narrowed as he said in disbelief. No matter what, the emperor was a supreme realm emperor who had almost reached the end of cultivation. His knowledge, strength, and cultivation had all reached an unimaginable level. At first, without any evidence, it was difficult for him to deduce the truth. However, now that the changes on Tong Huang's body were so obvious, how could he not deduce this? Refined? How can it be called refined? "It's just that I found a reason to live," Tong Huang said. That was because his body was filled with the innate indestructible essence, so even his words vaguely contained that essence. After exiting, it lingered in the void, as if it was going to exist in this void for billions of years, until this group of worlds was destroyed, until this connate inextinguishable spiritual light completely disappeared. Hearing this, the emperor's expression became even more unsightly. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. All sorts of experiences and doubts surged in his mind, allowing him to vaguely understand why this change had occurred.